Section 1. The joke is the delivery system. Here is something the show never said out loud. Every joke The Simpsons ever made was a wrapper. And inside every wrapper was the same thing, a specific, accurate, uncomfortable truth about American life that the show knew you would not sit still for if it came at you directly. Think about what happens when a documentary tells you that the American working class is being systematically left behind. You reach for your phone, you call it heavy, you say you are not in the mood. But when Homer Simpson discovers that his car insurance does not cover damage he caused himself, and he stares at the paperwork with the blank confusion of a man who has just been handed a ransom note written in a language he does not speak, you laugh. The information lands before the defenses go up. The joke was the delivery mechanism. The truth was always the cargo. That is what this is about, not the jokes themselves. What is riding inside them? The show has been doing this since the 17th of December 1989. 36 seasons, 788 episodes. The longest-running animated series, the longest-running sitcom, and the longest-running scripted primetime show in American television history. And across every one of those episodes, the writers were doing two things simultaneously: making you laugh and telling you something true about the country you live in. One thing made the other possible. You could not get the truth without the joke, because the joke was what got it past you. The original writing staff was not just funny. They were educated genuinely, deeply educated. Degrees from Harvard, Yale, Princeton, backgrounds in mathematics, political theory, computer science. These were people who had spent years studying the systems that shape American life, and who had developed a specific professional talent, finding where those systems were absurd. And the American systems, the working life, the school, the marriage, the government, the media, the church, the economy, were so rich with real absurdity that you barely needed to exaggerate. You just needed to look. That is the first thing to understand about how the show works. The comedy is not the exaggeration, the comedy is the accuracy. A doctor tells a patient that due to insurance limitations, he cannot prescribe the medication that would actually help, but he does have a pamphlet. A teacher explains to her class that textbooks are unavailable this year because the sports program needed new uniforms, and she says this with the specific exhaustion of someone who gave up being outraged by it years ago. A banker stamps a loan agreement with the satisfied expression of a man who has done this to 1,000 people exactly like the one sitting across from him. These are Simpsons jokes. They are also descriptions of things that happen in real life, delivered without editorializing, without a voice explaining why this is a problem, without a pause to let you feel the weight of it. The joke carries the argument fully assembled. You laugh. The truth is already inside you. The second thing to understand is how the show structures its honesty. There are three ways it delivers truth through comedy that repeat across the entire run. The first is the straight face. A character says something outrageous in a completely normal tone, in a scene where nobody around them reacts. The gap between what is being said and how it is being received is where the joke lives. And in that gap, the thing being said gets to be what it actually is true before your brain has had time to categorize it as political or heavy or something you are not in the mood for. The second is the institutional reversal. The show establishes what an institution is supposed to do, and then shows you that it does the exact opposite. The police are supposed to protect people. In Springfield, the police protect property and respond to calls according to the social status of the caller. The courts are supposed to deliver justice. In Springfield, they deliver outcomes proportional to the quality of your attorney, which is proportional to your ability to pay for one. The school is supposed to prepare children for the future. In Springfield, it sorts children into economic categories before they are old enough to understand what is happening to them. Each reversal is a joke. Each reversal is also a description of how the real institution actually functions. The comedy and the critique are the same gesture. The third is the long game. The joke that pays off across seasons, across storylines that seem unconnected until they are not, across character arcs so slow they feel like life rather than narrative. Homer's relationship with his father, Marge's buried ambitions, Lisa's growing understanding that the world she is living in was not built for someone like her. These are not jokes in the conventional sense. They are long-form truthfulness delivered in installments over decades, with humor providing cover for the emotional weight accumulating underneath. The genius of the method is in the restraint. A Simpsons joke almost never stops to explain itself. It makes its point and keeps moving. There is a scene where Homer tries to get a loan from a bank. The banker explains the interest rate and the penalty clauses and the conditions under which the bank can repossess. Homer signs without reading. The banker stamps the paperwork with the expression of a man who has done this 1,000 times. The audience laughs at Homer's obliviousness. What the scene is actually showing is how consumer debt is designed, how the machinery of financial obligation functions best when the person entering it does not fully understand the terms. The joke and the critique are the same object. You cannot separate them. What we are going to do over the next few hours is follow this show into the specific truths it chose to tell. The working life that goes nowhere. The school that sorts children before it teaches them. The long middle of a marriage that nobody in entertainment wants to show you. The media that substitutes performance for information. The faith that has outlasted the sincerity that built it. The wealth that has insulated itself from the consequences of its own power. The parenthood that keeps falling short of the love it contains. The democracy that runs on appearances. The environment traded quietly, piece by piece, for the economic arrangements that depend on its destruction. Each of these is a subject The Simpsons addressed directly, repeatedly, in jokes so precise that you had to laugh, and truths so specific that the laughing did not entirely protect you from feeling them. Settle in, get comfortable. The first truth the show committed to, the one it returned to more consistently than any other, across every season and every renewal, is also the simplest and the most devastating one. The American dream, as Homer Simpson was living it, was never going to work out the way he had been told it would. And the show knew it from the first episode. It just needed 36 seasons of jokes to say it completely. Drop a comment right now and tell me what time it is, where you are, and what part of the world you are watching from. And if you want more like this, subscribe. It takes 2 seconds, and it helps more than you know. Now, let us go to Springfield. Section 2. Homer's job is the whole point. Homer Simpson has worked at the Springfield nuclear power plant since the beginning of the show. Same job, same desk, same man in the same chair, doing the same work for 36 years. No promotion, no raise worth mentioning, no lateral movement. No acknowledgement from his employer that he exists as a person rather than a component that can be replaced if it stops functioning at a minimum acceptable level. His job title is Safety Inspector. Let that sit for a second. The man whose job it is to prevent the most dangerous fictional industrial facility in television history from poisoning an entire town is someone who sleeps at his workstation, once caused a nuclear incident by throwing a donut into the reactor core to see if it would get bigger, and has an IQ that the show's own creator has placed at 55. That is the first joke. And the truth inside the first joke is that the safety inspection system exists as a performance of safety rather than an actual guarantee of it. Homer is not safety. Homer is the documentation that safety was considered. Burns hired him because a competent safety inspector would shut the plant down within a week. Homer ensures the violations continue, the radiation keeps leaking. Burns keeps the lights on and the money flowing, and Springfield stays dependent, and nobody asks the obvious question about the fish with 3 eyes. But that is a later section. Right now, the question is just this. Why does Homer keep going back? The simple answer is money. He needs it. His family needs health insurance. His kids see doctors. His house has a mortgage. His car needs repairs that he cannot predict and cannot absorb when they come. The floor of his financial life is close enough to the ground that one bad month would change everything about their situation, and Homer knows this in the way that people know things that live in their body rather than their conscious mind. He does not think about it. He just keeps going back. But it is more specific than that. Homer cannot leave because his family's health insurance exists only as long as he has the job. Not health insurance he chose, not health insurance he could take somewhere else. Insurance tied directly to his continued employment at a specific facility owned by a specific man who treats him with the warmth of someone examining mold on a petri dish. This is the trap, not the abstract idea of needing income. The precise, suffocating arrangement in which your children's access to medical care is held by the goodwill of your employer. This is not a Simpsons invention. This is the American employer-provided healthcare model, which ties the ability to get your kids vaccinated and your own illnesses treated to maintaining one specific employment relationship with one specific employer. Homer cannot leave Burns. Not really. Not without gambling with the thing he cares about most, which is keeping his family intact. The joke is that Homer is too dim to articulate this trap. The truth is that millions of people who are not dim at all live inside exactly the same trap and cannot articulate their way out of it either. There is an episode where he gets out. Homer gets offered a job at a bowling alley, his dream job, a place where he has actual skill, actual pleasure, actual purpose. He quits the plant with a joy that is almost painful to watch because you can already feel what is coming. The bowling alley closes. The dream evaporates. Homer goes back. He sits down at his console in the nuclear glow, and the show gives you one beat of it, one beat of Homer back in his chair, back in the building, back under the invisible poison before it cuts away. One beat, then cut. The restraint is part of the method. The show always knows when to cut. The financial texture of the Simpson household is where the show does its most specific economic work. These people are not poor. They are not wealthy. They are in the space between, where income covers expenses only when nothing goes wrong, and things are always going wrong. The water heater breaks, the car needs brakes. A medical bill arrives with a portion the insurance declined to cover because of a clause that allows the company to pay 60% of something they describe as non-essential, even when it clearly is not. These events are not dramatic, they are just relentless. Each one barely resolved before the next one begins. The comedy is in Homer's escalating panic each time. The argument is in the accumulation, the way this never quite stops. The way it is the texture of the life rather than an interruption of it. There was a real-world study that found a majority of Americans could not cover a $400 unexpected expense without borrowing money or selling something. $400. Homer's financial life lives in that territory, exactly in that territory, and the show has been depicting it in joke form for 3.5 decades, because the truth of it is both universal and deeply uncomfortable, and uncomfortable truths dressed as comedy travel further than uncomfortable truths dressed as facts. Now talk about the raises. Homer, across 36 years at the Springfield nuclear power plant, has received effectively no real increase in compensation. The decades the show has been airing overlap almost exactly with the period during which real wages for American industrial workers stagnated. Productivity increased, corporate profits increased, executive compensation increased at rates without historical precedent. The share of economic output going to capital rather than labor grew year after year. Wages stayed flat. Homer's stagnant salary is not a character quirk invented for comedy. It is a data point in a decades-long trend line, rendered in yellow, delivered through jokes about donuts. The show makes this explicit in a scene where Burns agrees to give Homer a raise. Homer is ecstatic. The raise is announced. The scene holds just long enough for the viewer doing arithmetic to realize that the raise, in dollar terms, is so small relative to the inflation since Homer's last adjustment that he has in real terms taken a pay cut. The joke is Homer's failure to understand this. The argument is the math itself, visible to anyone paying attention. Burns knows Homer will not leave. Burns knows that Homer's desperate need for approval, a wound that runs back through his entire psychology, back through his absent mother and his withholding father, back through every interaction that told Homer he was not worth much, makes him almost infinitely exploitable. Burns does not need to offer Homer more money because Homer is not going anywhere. Homer will not organize because Homer barely understands what organizing means. Homer will not file a complaint with a labor board because Homer does not know labor boards exist, and if he did, he would be afraid that complaining would make everything worse. This is the trap at its most structural and its most personal simultaneously. Not just the economic trap of wages and benefits and employment dependency, the psychological trap of a worker shaped so thoroughly by his circumstances that resistance is not merely difficult, it is almost psychologically unavailable to him. The show produced a union episode more honest than most political dramas would risk. Homer ends up as a union representative through a series of misunderstandings played entirely for comedy. He does not want the role. He does not know what it requires. But the episode does not spend its time mocking unions. It depicts a labor dispute with specific accuracy, the frustration of workers who feel systematically unheard, the intransigence of management treating negotiation as theater rather than process, the way institutional power outlasts individual patience, even when the individuals are entirely correct. Homer is incompetent as a representative. The workers he represents are still right. Both things are true simultaneously. That is a more sophisticated treatment of the subject than most serious drama manages. Homer's relationship to his job is also a story about what happens to a person's inner life when their working life has no room for it. The plant is not a place where Homer is engaged. It is not a place where he grows or is challenged or feels the satisfaction of something done well. It is a place where he pushes a button and waits for 5 o'clock. The quiet devastation underneath all the donut jokes is that Homer is not a man without an inner life. When he has access to the things he loves, food, music, the company of people he cares about, the moments of connection with his family, he is completely alive. He has genuine passion and genuine curiosity and a capacity for joy that is almost embarrassingly sincere. The man who falls asleep at the nuclear console is the same man who weeps openly at a piece of music that moves him. He is not a man without depth. He is a man whose depth has been locked away from his working life so completely that the two barely seem to belong to the same person. The plant gets Homer from 8 to 5. Everything worth knowing about Homer happens after 5. And here is the image the show gives you in a later season. In an episode most people have not seen because they stopped watching before they got there, Homer, briefly, ends up with real financial security. And the scene the writers chose to show you the single image that represents what financial security would mean for this specific man is not a vacation, not a car, not anything large. Homer goes to a grocery store. He puts things in the cart without checking the price. He just reaches and takes and puts in. He does not calculate. He does not put anything back. He does not perform the low-level constant arithmetic of constrained living that he performs automatically in every other grocery store scene in the show's history. He just shops. The camera watches him do it quietly. That is the truth inside the joke. Not that Homer needed luxury, just that Homer needed, once, to go to a grocery store and not do the math. To just be there, putting things in a cart, the way people do when that is not a decision. The show knew exactly what it was saying. It always did. Section 3. Springfield Elementary is every school that cannot afford to be good. There is a school at the center of Springfield. It has been failing its students in the same specific ways since the first episode it appeared in. The building is structurally compromised and continues operating anyway. The cafeteria serves food of origin that is better left unexamined. The textbooks, when they exist, describe as future events things that happened before most of the students were born. The gymnasium equipment dates from an era before safety standards were widely adopted. Springfield Elementary is a running joke. It is also one of the most accurate portraits of a chronically underfunded public school ever put on American television. The joke and the accuracy are not separate things. The show constructed the comedy from the reality. Start with Principal Skinner, because he is where the institutional failure becomes most personal and most specific. Skinner is a man who once had ideals. The show does not tell you this directly, but you can see the traces of them in the rare moments when he speaks about education with something that resembles actual feeling. When a student does something genuinely remarkable, and his pride surfaces before his administrative manner can suppress it, he wanted to do something that mattered. He ended up running Springfield Elementary, which is a place where mattering is structurally prevented. His situation as an administrator is defined by constraint in every direction. He cannot hire better teachers because the district budget does not allow competitive salaries. He cannot repair the building because the maintenance budget was redirected years ago to cover insurance costs from previous structural failures, which themselves arose from previous maintenance redirections. He cannot purchase updated materials because the purchasing process requires school board approval, and the school board has priorities that are almost entirely disconnected from the question of what children need to learn. He holds the title of authority without the substance of it. The comedy around Skinner is about his relationship with his mother, his Vietnam mannerisms, his resentment of Bart as a force of entropy. Underneath it is a portrait of a person who chose a vocation, found the institutional conditions of practicing it completely incompatible with what the vocation required, and has been there long enough that leaving would mean acknowledging what those years cost him. This is not an exaggeration of a type. This is the ordinary experience of enormous numbers of teachers, not the cinematic version where a dedicated educator changes lives against institutional odds, but the real version, where someone comes to work every day in a building that does not provide adequate support, does the best they can with what they have, goes home tired, comes back the next morning, misses. Krabappel is the show's most complete portrait of professional burnout, and the portrait is built from specific, recognizable components. She arrived at Springfield Elementary with some version of genuine intention. The Edna Krabappel the audience knows has been worn down by years of inadequate resources, absent administrative support, and a class roster that consistently includes Bart Simpson, which is the show's way of giving her burnout a comedic face while keeping the cause accurate. She smokes at her desk. She grades papers with the enthusiasm of someone completing a task they learned to resent years ago. The show never condescends to her. It knows exactly how she got here. In one episode, her professional judgment is challenged by a parent who considers himself an authority on education after reading one book about it. The joke is that the parent is clearly wrong and clearly overconfident. The truth inside the joke is that this happens constantly to actual teachers, from parents, from administrators, from legislators who have never managed a classroom, all of whom have strong opinions about what teachers should do, and none of whom will be personally affected by the consequences of being wrong. Krabappel's exhaustion is not laziness. It is the reasonable accumulation of someone told repeatedly, and by people with institutional authority over her, that her professional judgment is less important than someone else's casual conviction. Now Bart Simpson fails by every metric the school applies. He reads below grade level. He cannot sustain attention through a conventional lesson. He disrupts class, defies authority, produces academic work, somewhere between inadequate and non-existent. The school has categorized him as a management problem. The show keeps returning to the fact that Bart is not unintelligent. He is extraordinarily good at things the school has no interest in measuring. He reads people with an accuracy that most adults cannot match. He navigates complex social dynamics with the ease of someone who has been paying careful attention to how humans work since he was old enough to notice. He designs and executes elaborate schemes that require genuine planning and real understanding of cause and effect. In moments where he is engaged by something he actually finds interesting, the capacity for sustained attention is right there, completely visible. The school cannot reach it because the school is not built to reach it. Bart fails at compliance. He is not incapable of learning. The school cannot tell the difference because making the distinction would require an individualized response the institution is not resourced to provide. Lisa's experience of the same institution makes the argument from the opposite direction. Lisa is exactly what Springfield Elementary is designed to produce: the highest performing, academically compliant student, thriving on every metric the system uses to measure success. And Lisa is structurally, persistently unhappy in school for most of the show's run. The unhappiness is precise. The intellectual content of Springfield Elementary is calibrated to a level that does not challenge her. She sits through lessons she understood before they started. She finishes assignments in fractions of the allotted time. She is always waiting for the conversation that meets her at her level, the idea that genuinely surprises her, the teacher who sees what she actually is rather than the number on the paper she handed in. The school cannot give her this. An institution operating under budget constraints and standardized curricula and class sizes that preclude individualization cannot simultaneously be the place where an exceptional mind receives proper engagement. Here is what the show is saying through both of them at once. Bart and Lisa are the opposite ends of the same problem. The system optimizes for the median. The students whose needs fall at the median manage adequately. Everyone else pays the cost of that optimization in one form or another. Bart pays it one way. Lisa pays it another. The background students, the ones the show never has time to depict individually, are presumably paying it in their own ways that the camera never stops to document. The school board scenes are where the institutional critique becomes most specific. Springfield's school board is composed of people with no apparent interest in education. Their meeting agendas are dominated by procedural disputes, budget arguments that have nothing to do with classroom outcomes, and personal animosities carried forward from previous fiscal years. Decisions that will directly affect the quality of education available to Springfield's children are made by people more occupied at the moment of the vote with what they are having for lunch or whether a colleague insulted them in a procedural motion 3 years ago. This is not a fantasy of dysfunction. This is what institutional governance actually looks like when organizations have been running long enough that survival has replaced mission as the primary goal. The school board scenes are funny because they are absurd. They are absurd because anyone who has attended a real school board meeting will recognize them with the specific discomfort of seeing their own experience given a punchline. The funding question is where the critique becomes most targeted. There is an episode built around the discovery of oil beneath the school's property. For a brief act, there is real money enough to actually improve the institution. And then, through a process involving Burns and the town council, the money is gone. The resources generated by something that sat beneath the school for decades do not improve the school. They end up elsewhere, through a sequence of individually defensible steps that collectively constitute a transfer of public benefit to private advantage. This is a joke. The shape of it, public resources flowing away from public institutions toward existing concentrations of private wealth, is not fictional. It is the real dynamic that operates whenever public resources are discovered adjacent to private economic power. The career counselor episode is the show's most direct statement about what school is actually for versus what it claims to be for. A counselor visits Springfield Elementary, administers aptitude tests, and guides students toward their appropriate futures. The method: the tests identify categories, and the counselor routes children into those categories in ways that align available children with available labor needs. Bart's result indicates manual labor not because Bart has expressed any interest in it or shown particular aptitude for any specific trade, but because his test profile matches students who do not advance into professional or academic tracks. This is played as a joke about Bart's academic record. The argument inside it is about what standardized assessment does in institutions without the resources to act meaningfully on what the assessment finds. It does not primarily identify potential, it primarily assigns category. It sorts children, by the metrics of compliance and standardized performance, into tracks that will statistically shape the scope of their adult economic lives. And it does this before the children being sorted are old enough to have had the experiences that might tell them what they are actually capable of. Springfield Elementary is a joke. It is also 36 years of patient, specific depiction of what chronically underfunded public education actually produces in the children it sorts, in the teachers it depletes, in the administrators it traps, and in the community that makes peace with the decline, because confronting its cause would require confronting everything else. Section 4. What 20 years of marriage actually looks like. The romantic comedy ends when the couple gets together. It ends there because the genre's entire structure is built around the obstacle, the misunderstanding, the wrong person, the rival, the gap that needs closing. Once it closes, the story is over. The wedding is the finale. Everything after is epilogue that the genre declines to show. The Simpsons begins exactly where the romantic comedy ends. Homer and Marge are already married when the show starts. 3 children, a mortgage. Years of accumulated shared history that contains both the best moments of 2 people's lives and the very ordinary ones that make up most of any long relation. The show is interested in the ordinary ones. It is interested in what happens in the long middle section, the part that most entertainment does not know how to tell when 2 people are still in the same house. Figuring out how to keep choosing each other across decades of the specific daily friction of being that close to another person. This was unusual in 1989. It is still relatively unusual now. Let us start with the fighting, because the fighting is where the show is most honest. Homer and Marge fight. They fight about money, because money is what couples with constrained finances fight about most, because money functions as a proxy for a dozen other things: security, respect, whether the other person is taking the situation as seriously as it deserves. They fight about Homer's behavior, which is frequently irresponsible and frequently embarrassing in the specific way of someone who means well and lacks the judgment to convert good intentions into good outcomes. They fight about the distance that opens between 2 people when one of them is managing the entire emotional infrastructure of a family and the other one is spending his days in a nuclear plant not quite thinking about anything in particular. And the fights are almost never about what they appear to be about. That is the truth about marital conflict that most entertainment sidesteps. The argument is nominally about the thing on the surface. It is actually about the feeling underneath the thing. The fear of not being seen, the frustration of being taken for granted, the specific loneliness that can live inside a marriage between two people who are sleeping in the same room and are somehow not quite reaching each other. The show depicts this with the specificity of people who have either experienced marriage themselves or paid very close attention to people who have. Marge carries the weight of what researchers call emotional labor, and the show is direct about this in a way that most family entertainment of any era has not been willing to be. Emotional labor is the largely invisible work of managing the feelings of the people around you, anticipating needs before they are expressed, maintaining the social architecture of a family and a community. It falls almost entirely on Marge. She keeps track of what the children need and when they need it. She maintains the family's social relationships. She is aware when someone in the extended community is struggling and responds to it. She performs the continuous background calculation of what everyone around her is feeling and adjusts her behavior accordingly, the effortful, invisible work that the people doing it almost never get credit for, because the work is invisible precisely because it is working. Homer does not perform emotional labor. He barely perceives emotional labor. He moves through his domestic environment with the specific obliviousness of a person for whom the environment has always been organized and maintained by someone else. He is not malicious about this. He is not consciously exploiting Marge's effort. He is genuinely unaware of most of what she does, in the same way you can be unaware of the structural elements holding up the building you are standing in. They are invisible precisely because they are doing their job. The show makes this visible through a recurring structure. Marge goes away for a period and Homer manages the household. The collapse is immediate and comprehensive. The house deteriorates. The children eat things that are technically food. Basic tasks that Marge performs as background processes require Homer's full conscious attention and still produce inadequate results. The comedy is in Homer's escalating alarm at the scale of the failure. The truth is about what is being done every day without acknowledgement, invisible because competently performed, taken for granted because invisibility is the condition of its success. The show does not resolve this. Homer does not have the revelation and begin equitably distributing the domestic load going forward. The patterns are too established, the habits too deep. The structural conditions, Homer's job, his cognitive limitations, Marge's own deeply internalized expectations about her role are not transformed by Homer spending one terrible weekend learning what she actually does. The joke plays, life continues. The weight stays where it was. That is the honest version of the long marriage, not the version where love solves structural imbalances. The version where love coexists with structural imbalances that persist, and where the coexistence itself, the choosing to stay, the daily decision to keep doing this together despite what is not changing, is the actual content of the relationship. Marge, before Homer, was becoming something. She had ambitions. The show depicts them, specifically the painting, the various ventures she attempts across different seasons, the professional context where her actual competence is visible, in a way her domestic role never quite requires or rewards. Every time one of these alternative selves surfaces, there is an episode built around it, and by the end of that episode, Marge returns to the house on Evergreen Terrace, to the family, to the role that contains her. The show does not frame this as simple tragedy. Marge loves her family with a completeness that is clearly genuine, but it does not pretend that love forecloses the question of what else might have been possible, or that choosing every time something that might be hers alone comes up, and she chooses the family instead, costs nothing. The cost is real. The love is also real. The show holds both without resolving them. There is also the simple tedium of a long marriage that the show depicts with more honesty than most entertainment will risk. The moments where you have been with someone for 20 years and you are sitting across from them at dinner and there is nothing new to say. The intimacy that was once electric has become comfortable in the sense of unremarkable present, stable, not requiring active maintenance, and therefore not receiving it. The passion is still real but quieter, operating at a lower temperature that is sustainable rather than spectacular. This is not depicted as failure. A marriage that has settled into sustainable warmth after 2 decades is not a dead marriage. But the show does not sanitize the experience of living inside that maturity. It acknowledges the moments of loneliness that can exist within it, the loneliness of being with someone who knows you completely and is still, sometimes, not quite there with you. Marge and Homer's marriage survives everything the show throws at it, not because they are perfectly matched or because love is sufficient, because both of them keep deciding, in their different and imperfect ways, to stay. Homer stays because he cannot imagine a life without Marge, and because he loves her with a sincerity that is almost childlike in its completeness. Marge stays because she loves Homer, and also because she can see the person inside the failure, the person Homer actually is, when his limitations are not in the way and that person is genuinely worth staying for. The final truth the Marge and Homer marriage tells across 36 years is the simplest one. Love, in the long version, is not primarily about passion or compatibility or shared interests. It is primarily about choosing to see the person in front of you rather than the person you wish they were, choosing to respond to who they are, choosing every morning and every evening to be present in this specific life with this specific person, even when the life is constrained and the person is imperfect and the choosing costs something real. They have been making that choice for 36 years. The show watches them do it every week. And in watching them do it, it gave everyone who recognized something of their own marriage in it, or their parents' marriage, or the marriage they were quietly afraid they were becoming something rare. A version of long-term love that was honest about what it costs, and was somehow, through all of it, entirely worth watching. Section 5. Kent Brockman and the Performance of Truth. In Springfield, there is a local news program. It is anchored by a man named Kent Brockman, who has the hair and the vocal authority and the precisely calibrated manner of someone presenting himself as a trusted source of verified information. Kent Brockman is not a journalist. He is a performance of journalism so practiced and so convincing that his audience cannot tell the difference. That distinction between the performance of journalistic authority and its actual exercise is the show's entire argument about the American media packed into one recurring character. The most famous Brockman moment crystallizes the critique so efficiently that it is worth going through in detail. In a Treehouse of Horror episode, he is covering what appears to be an alien invasion. He receives a transmission he interprets as a message from the invaders. His on-air response is immediate and complete. He welcomes the insect overlords. He declares his personal willingness to collaborate with whatever force has just taken control. He does not pause. He does not hesitate. He does not appear to weigh any alternative response. The moment the power dynamic appears to shift, Brockman shifts with it. This is played as an absurdist joke. The truth inside it is about what happens when media institutions prioritize their own survival over the values they nominally represent, the specific cowardice of authority that maintains its form while emptying its content. Brockman looks exactly like a journalist as he collaborates with the imaginary invaders. The posture is correct. The vocal authority is intact. Nothing in the performance signals that the performance has been hollowed out. That is precisely the point. Form can persist after content has departed. The uniform keeps signaling the role even after the person wearing it has abandoned what the role requires. The show returned to this throughout its run in less theatrical ways. Brockman deciding what constitutes news based on drama rather than importance. Brockman inserting himself into stories that were not about him until his presence made them about him. Brockman receiving direction from the station's ownership and adjusting his editorial positioning accordingly, with no acknowledgement to his audience that an adjustment occurred. This is a portrait of a media system assembled joke by joke across 3 decades, during which the American media landscape changed almost beyond recognition. From the 3-network world the show began in, through cable news, through the internet's disruption of print journalism, through social media's fragmentation of how information reaches people through all of these changes, the show's fundamental critique stayed consistent. Media institutions, regardless of the technology they run on, develop the same failure modes when organized primarily around capturing attention rather than providing information. Attention is the organizing principle, not accuracy. Not the difficult work of helping audiences develop reliable pictures of complex situations. Attention, the number of people watching, the emotional intensity that keeps them watching, the drama and fear and outrage that make people unwilling to look away even when looking is not informing them of anything. The bear episode is the show's most efficient demonstration of what this optimization produces. A bear appears near Springfield. The coverage is immediate and comprehensive. Politicians mobilize. Emergency meetings are held. Resources are deployed. The bear, one bear, behaving approximately as bears behave, is treated with the urgency of an existential threat. And when the bear wanders away and the cameras follow the next story, Springfield has spent enormous social and political and financial capital responding to a media artifact, while the actual ongoing problems, the contaminated water, the deteriorating school, the economic conditions slowly constricting its residents, received none of that mobilized attention. This is the most precise thing the show said about media and public attention. A system organized around emotional arousal will reliably generate emotional arousal about things that produce compelling footage, while the slow, structural, undramatic problems that most affect people's daily lives receive nothing. A bear is compelling footage. Economic stagnation is not. A dramatic crime is compelling footage. Systematic environmental contamination is not. The media does not choose to ignore the structural problems. It is built for a different kind of content, and it optimizes continuously for the kind that generates the most immediate emotional response. Homer's relationship to television is the show's most sustained examination of what this optimization produces in individual audiences over time. Homer watches enormous amounts of television. Television tells Homer things. Homer believes them. Television shows Homer what to want, what to fear, what is funny, what is wrong. Homer does not experience this as being influenced because the influence is not felt as influence. It is felt as preference, as intuition, as the natural formation of his own views. That is what the show was saying, through Homer on his couch, about how media shapes audiences. Not that audiences are passive. Not that watching television destroys the capacity for independent thought. That sustained exposure to content organized around emotional manipulation produces, over time, a relationship between the content and the viewer that is very difficult to distinguish from genuine belief. The television provides experiences that feel like having thoughts. Homer has them. Krusty the Clown is the show's most complete portrait of what the entertainment industry does with audience love. Krusty Herschel, Schmoikel, Pinchas, Yerucham, Krustovsky, the person behind the makeup, is a brand, an entertainment industrial complex, a continuous production of a character designed to generate the emotional loyalty of children who will convert that loyalty into purchases. The man performing the character is complicated and deeply disappointed by his own life, and genuinely indifferent to his audience in the way that extremely famous entertainers sometimes are not cruel, just distant. The character is warm and funny and child-adjacent in ways that generate real affection. The show maintains the separation between these two things consistently. Bart loves Krusty with a completeness that is both touching and entirely misplaced. He loves the character. The character is a product. The product exists to convert emotional attachment into commercial transactions. Bart buys the merchandise. He watches the show. He participates in the franchise. His genuine love funds an economic relationship that runs entirely in one direction and was designed that way from the first moment the Krusty brand was conceived. The show is not judging Bart for this love. It is showing you how the machine that manufactures it works, clearly enough that you can see both the genuine feeling and the commercial architecture built to harvest it simultaneously. What makes Brockman the perfect vehicle for all of this is that he is not malicious. He is not consciously doing harm. He is a person who built a career by successfully performing a role that the system rewards, and he performs it with genuine professional pride. The system he operates in rewards what it rewards, and what it rewards does not correspond to what an informed citizenry actually needs. Brockman is a product of the structure. The critique is structural, and Brockman embodies it with the specific clarity of someone who has been doing it so long that he no longer needs to think about what he is doing. Section 6. The God who talks to Homer and ignores Ned Flanders. God exists in the Simpsons universe. This is not a metaphor. God has appeared on screen, face visible, in conversation with Homer, across multiple episodes. He has opinions. He has preferences. He has, in at least one episode, told Homer directly that his time was coming. A statement that lands with a different weight once you know that 6 months after that conversation, Homer fell into a coma. The fact that God has spoken directly to Homer Simpson and has never, in 36 seasons, spoken directly to Ned Flanders, is one of the most pointed religious observations in the history of American television. It is delivered so quietly, so incidentally, without any commentary or underlining, that you miss it entirely if you are watching at a surface level. But it is consistent, and it is the most efficient single image the show ever built to carry its argument about faith and the institutions organized around it. Ned Flanders does everything correctly. He attends church consistently. He prays with real attention. He studies scripture. He maintains doctrinal correctness with a rigor that most members of his congregation do not approach. He tithes. He participates in every institutional expression of his faith with the fullness of a person who believes completely in what those institutions are designed to provide. He is, by every available measure of institutional religious compliance, the ideal practitioner, and God ignores him. Homer falls asleep in church. He treats Sunday obligation with approximately the same enthusiasm he brings to nuclear safety inspection. His theological positions are either heretical or simply incoherent depending on the episode. God shows up for Homer. God has conversations with Homer. God told Homer his time was coming. God has been present in Homer's experience in a way that Ned, who has organized his entire life around cultivating the conditions for exactly this kind of presence, has never once experienced. This is not an accident of plotting. The implication is specific. Institutional forms of religious observance and the actual experience of whatever those institutions are organized around are not reliably connected. Doing everything the institution prescribes does not guarantee the experience the institution claims to enable. Not doing those things does not preclude it either. The experience, in the show's depiction, responds to something that formal compliance cannot manufacture. Reverend Lovejoy is the institutional dimension of this argument made flesh. He is Springfield's pastor, and his relationship to his own vocation tells the story of professional erosion with specific accuracy. Lovejoy did not set out to be an indifferent pastor. The show is careful about this. He came to Springfield with intention. The fragments the show provides imply someone who once found genuine meaning in the combination of community service and spiritual guidance. His congregation made this impossible in the specific way congregations can, not through hostility, but through the relentless particularity of real people with real complicated needs, requiring real pastoral attention that is more than the institution is built to provide. And heading that congregation, from a pastoral demand standpoint, was Ned Flanders, who calls Lovejoy at all hours, whose religious questions are detailed and earnest and structurally infinite, who takes the minister's role with a completeness that would be flattering if Lovejoy had not been depleted past the point of finding it flattering. Lovejoy's response to Ned giving him a dog, hoping the animal absorbs the spiritual energy currently directed at the pastor, is both hilarious and genuinely horrible as an act of pastoral care. It works. In the narrow sense of reducing call volume, it is a complete abdication of the responsibility the role requires. And the show depicts it accurately, as the adaptation of a man who has been professionally depleted past the point where genuine engagement is available to him. This is the story of religious professionals in institutional settings across traditions and across time. The slow erosion of the calling by the conditions of its practice. The gap between ministerial work as imagined during training and ministerial work as practiced in the daily reality of a congregation of imperfect, demanding, spiritually complicated people. Lovejoy is not a failure. He is a person who chose a calling, found the institutional conditions incompatible with it, and arrived at a state of professional performance that looks correct from the outside, while the interior quality that gives the performance its meaning has been depleted. Springfield's churchgoers attend for reasons that the show depicts honestly and without condescension. They are there because that is what one does on Sunday. Because the community is socially organized around the assumption of attendance, because the events adjacent to the church, the potlucks, the parking lot conversations, serve genuine social needs that have nothing to do with theology. Because not being there would require a social explanation that is simply not worth the friction. These are real reasons. They are the dominant reasons for attendance in communities like Springfield. The show depicts them without suggesting they constitute simple hypocrisy. It just notices the gap between the stated reason and the actual reasons, and finds that gap worth the comedy it produces. The prosperity gospel operators who pass through Springfield are depicted as what they are: Professionals working a commercial model using religious language as the primary tool. They understand the emotional needs of their audiences with precision because they have studied those needs carefully and know exactly which words and gestures and promises activate them. What the show is careful about, and this is what separates it from simpler satire, is the treatment of those audiences. The people responding to these operators are not shown as simply foolish. They are people with genuine spiritual and emotional needs that standard institutional offerings have not adequately met, who are vulnerable to a skilled communicator who knows exactly how to meet those needs in the short term through the medium of an amplified presence and a promise that their faith will be rewarded. The operator is the target. The audience is the victim. The show maintains that distinction. The God talks to Homer observation, built consistently across the full run, builds toward an argument that has roots in religious thought across traditions. The idea that genuine spiritual experience does not reliably follow from institutional compliance, that it responds to something other than doctrinal correctness and faithful attendance, appears in various forms in most of the world's major spiritual traditions. Mystics across history have noticed that formalized institutional paths to spiritual experience tend to produce very good institutional compliance and not much else. The show does not argue this directly. It just shows you who God talks to in Springfield and who he does not, and leaves the observation sitting there without comment, available to anyone paying attention. That is a remarkable thing for a cartoon to do. To take a question that has occupied serious thinkers for millennia and render it as a comparison between two neighbors in an animated sitcom, without explanation or resolution, letting the observation carry the argument entirely on its own. Section 7. Mr. Burns and what a century of unchecked wealth actually looks like. There is a recurring scene across the entire run of the show. Burns does something to Homer, fires him, demotes him, dismisses him with the casual indifference of someone removing a minor inconvenience, and Homer's response is not anger. It is a specific, complicated, slightly desperate gratitude for whatever limited recognition Burns just provided before withdrawing it. Homer cannot sustain anger at Burns, partly because Homer's attention span was not designed for sustained grievance, but partly, and this is what the show builds carefully across 3 decades, because Homer's entire psychological architecture makes resistance almost unavailable to him. You do not bite the hand. Even when the hand has been poisoning the water supply for 36 years, Burns is not a generic villain. That is the most important thing to understand about him as a satirical construction. He is a specific kind of American wealth, the kind with roots that predate the country, that has been accumulating and compounding across enough generations that the current holder did not build it and does not maintain it in any active sense. The fortune maintains itself. The systems Burns built or inherited or purchased keep running. The money generates more money with the passive efficiency that capital develops at scale, the momentum of accumulated advantage carrying everything forward regardless of what the nominal owner does on any given Tuesday. Burns works, in a sense. He schemes and manipulates and comes to the plant. But his activity is almost entirely organized around extraction rather than creation, getting more from systems already in motion rather than building anything new. His particular genius is predatory. He identifies inefficiencies in extraction and eliminates them. He identifies regulations that constrain extraction and removes them through political channels his wealth makes accessible. He identifies people who threaten his position and neutralizes them through the legal apparatus that decades of accumulated resources keep fully staffed. The result, across a century of operation, is an enterprise that has grown not by creating value but by capturing it. This is not a fantasy of capitalist villainy invented for television. It is a reasonable description of how significant concentrations of wealth actually sustain themselves across generations. The show gives Burns theatrical accessories, the tented fingers, the excellent, the gleeful contempt for everyone with less power, but the structure beneath the theatricality is realistic in ways that matter. The environmental argument embedded in Burns's operation of the plant is the show's most persistent and most targeted political argument. Burns does not oppose environmental regulation because he is cartoonishly evil. He opposes it for specific, economically rational reasons the show depicts accurately. Compliance would reduce margins. Acknowledging the violations would expose him to liability. Accepting regulatory authority would weaken his negotiating position in every future dispute. Each objection Burns raises to cleaning up the plant is an objection that actual polluting industries have raised in actual regulatory proceedings, in actual states, with actual consequences for actual communities downstream. Blinky, the three-eyed fish pulled from the river near the plant, is one of the show's most economically efficient satirical constructions. The joke is, a fish has three eyes. The argument is that visible, measurable, documented environmental damage can be managed away through the combination of corporate communication, political access, and the human capacity to accept what is convenient. Burns is forced to eat Blinky on television. He does. The news cycle moves on. The fish still has three eyes. The water is still contaminated. The crisis was managed. Managing is not the same as resolving. The show knows the difference. Burns's relationship to his workforce is the show's most sustained examination of what the employer-employee dynamic looks like when the power differential is absolute and has been absolute for a century. Burns does not hate his employees. He does not experience malice toward them. He barely registers them as full persons. They are components of a system-functional interest, mild irritation at malfunction, nothing resembling emotional response to the component's own experience of its situation. This is not a personality defect unique to Burns. It is what extreme and sustained economic power does to empathy over time. When you control resources at a scale that insulates you from all the consequences that affect everyone around you, the feedback mechanisms that develop human empathy stop functioning. Your decisions cause suffering. You do not experience the suffering. The people you employ experience it. The people living downstream experience it. You exist in conditions that separate you from the consequences of what you cause, and over time the not experiencing becomes an incapacity to imagine. Burns cannot imagine what it is like to be Homer. The wealth has built a barrier between himself and the empathy that proximity to consequence would otherwise have produced. The episode where Burns loses his money is the most direct examination of what happens when that insulation is removed. Burns, stripped of financial position, is nearly destroyed. Not by material hardship, the episode is careful about this. He experiences constraint rather than genuine deprivation. What nearly destroys him is the psychological experience of being one among many, rather than the force around which everything orbits. Burns's identity, constructed across a century of absolute economic dominance, is built on the fact of his exceptional position. Remove the exceptionality, and there is very little interior life remaining. He is not a person who happens to be rich. He is a rich person in the fullest sense. Someone whose entire interior life has organized itself around the fact of wealth in a way that makes the wealth and the self effectively inseparable. The show made its most honest political observation about concentrated wealth not in any single dramatic episode, but in the accumulated background of every episode where Burns interacts with Springfield's political structure. Burns does not need to vote. He does not need to run for office. He does not need to do any of the things that formal democratic participation requires, because his power operates at a level where formal democracy is downstream of the economic relationships he manages. He cultivates political relationships through the legitimate mechanisms of business connection and campaign contribution. He maintains legal teams capable of challenging regulatory action through processes that outlast most administrations. He employs enough of Springfield's residents that any political action threatening his interests threatens the employment security of a significant portion of the electorate. Formal democracy, for Burns, is one tool among many useful occasionally, entirely unnecessary when the other tools are sufficient. And Homer stands at the center of all of this. Employed by the man who destroyed his family, unknowingly funding the empire that stole his mother and shaped the damage that makes him so exploitable. The show's most devastating observation about power is not in any individual Burns scheme. It is in the fact that Homer keeps going back, every morning, without knowing why the weight he carries has exactly the shape it does. Burns wins. He always wins. The show is honest about this. Springfield keeps paying the cost in the grocery bills and the medical expenses and the water they drink and the children they raise in the shadow of those cracked cooling towers, making the arithmetic work, getting through the day, coming home. Section 8. What parents do the love that keeps falling short of what the children need? The first thing to say about Homer as a father is that by any conventional measurement, he is not a good one. He has endangered his children repeatedly through negligence and impulsiveness, and the specific kind of well-intentioned catastrophe that happens when someone with inadequate judgment is responsible for small people who depend on him. He has been absent, distracted, dismissive, and inadvertently cruel in the way people are cruel when they are not paying sufficient attention. The second thing to say about Homer as a father is that his children know, with a completeness the show establishes clearly and returns to consistently, that he loves them entirely. The love is not conditional on their achievements or their compliance or their ability to be easy. It is there, always. Underneath all the failure, the thing that makes the failure bearable rather than catastrophic. Bart and Lisa and Maggie do not doubt that their father loves them. They doubt his competence and his judgment and his attention. The love they do not doubt. This combination genuine, deep, impractical love, delivered alongside continuous practical failure, is the show's most specific and most honest portrait of what parenting actually looks like from the inside. Not the idealized version, where good intentions are efficiently converted into good outcomes and love is sufficient to close the gap between the parent you want to be and the parent you are. The real version, the one most parents recognize immediately, where the love is enormous and the gap is real and persistent and not, despite sustained effort, closing. Homer's failures are specific, and the show is specific about them. He does not listen. He is physically present with his children and emotionally elsewhere, occupied by whatever his attention has most recently attached itself to. He makes promises he does not keep, not through malice, but through the same attentional limitations that make him a mediocre safety inspector. He misreads situations. He responds to the emotional needs his children express with well-meaning solutions to problems he has diagnosed incorrectly. He tries frequently and sincerely, and the trying produces results somewhere between inadequate and counterproductive. This is parenting as most people who do it actually experience it. The aspiration and the shortfall. The love and the gap. The continuous distance between the parent you wanted to be and the parent you managed to be today, with these specific children, in this specific moment. The show's most devastating examination of this gap is in Homer's relationship with Lisa. Lisa needs from her father the one thing he is least equipped to provide: intellectual engagement. She needs a parent who can meet her curiosity at her level, who can sustain conversations about the things she is trying to understand, who can help her make sense of the world she is already outpacing. Homer cannot do this. He does not have the resources, and the show never pretends otherwise. He is aware of this inadequacy, the clear-eyed recognition that he is failing his daughter in precisely the way she most needs him. Not to fail her, and his awareness of it is one of the most quietly painful undercurrents. In the show's emotional texture, the show did something that most family entertainment does not attempt. It let the insufficiency remain real. Homer does not, through love and determination, become the intellectual father Lisa needs. He does not have a transformative conversation that bridges the gap permanently. What he does, in the moments the show gives him, is show up in the specific ways he can, with warmth, with presence, with love that asks nothing of Lisa except to be herself. And that showing up is its own kind of gift, distinct from what she needs and not a substitute for it, and not nothing. Marge as a mother is harder to discuss because the show tends to treat her competence as present and therefore unremarkable, while Homer's incompetence generates the drama. But the show is perceptive about the specific burden of her version of parenting. Marge parents continuously. There is no version of her day that does not involve active parental monitoring. The awareness is a constant background process running alongside everything else she does, tracking what each child needs, anticipating problems, preparing responses before they are required. This continuous parenting is not dramatic. It does not generate the crisis moments that build episodes. It is the invisible infrastructure that makes everything else in the household possible. The show's treatment of Bart's relationship with Homer is worth specific attention because it is the most comedically rich of the three parent-child dynamics and also the most emotionally complicated. Homer loves Bart with the same completeness he loves his other children, but his relationship to Bart's parenting is colored by a frustration he cannot suppress. Bart is genuinely difficult. His behavior is genuinely problematic by the standards of every institution he passes through. Homer's response, the strangling, the shouting, The expressions of frustrated love that look from outside like they might be something worse is played as a running joke across the entire series. The truth inside that joke is about what the show does with Homer's frustrated violence that could easily have been depicted as simply cruel. The strangling is never cruel in the show's hands. It is somehow, despite being objectively wrong, recognizable as the response of a person who loves deeply and is continuously failing the person they love, and whose failure keeps manifesting in the same undignified, love-revealing way. It is Homer's love breaking down under the weight of the gap between what he wants to be for Bart and what he manages to be. It is still wrong. It is still funny. It is also somehow honest about the texture of a specific kind of imperfect love. The fact that Bart and Lisa and Maggie each develop, across the show's run, into people who clearly and completely love their imperfect father is the show's answer to the question of whether this kind of imperfect love is sufficient. Sufficient for what? Not for giving children everything they need. Sufficient for making children who know they are loved. Those two things are not the same. The show has always known they are not the same. It has been showing you both simultaneously in every episode for 36 years. Section 9. Mayor Quimby, Chief Wiggum, and the Comedy of Civic Failure. There is an election in Springfield approximately every season. Mayors are elected. School board members are chosen. Ballot propositions are voted on. The machinery of democratic civic life runs continuously in the background of the show, producing outcomes that consistently serve the interests of the people who least need serving while maintaining the formal appearance of a participatory process in which everyone has a voice. Mayor Quimby works as satire the way the best satire always works. He is exactly the type he represents, rendered with enough specificity that the general becomes unavoidable. He carries the Kennedy-Boston political manner, the accent, the philandering, the patrician ease, the essential hollowness of a man who has been performing political authenticity for long enough that the performance and the person are no longer distinguishable from the outside. He has survived every available political scandal and remains continuously in office. The mechanism of his survival, the incumbent advantage, the party machinery, the way familiar corruption is preferable to unfamiliar disruption, even when both are clearly bad, is depicted accurately. Quimby does not govern, he manages appearances. His administration is defined by its relationship to public perception, rather than public outcomes. He responds to crises with press releases before he responds with action, and the press release is frequently the entirety of the response. He appears at ribbon cuttings and disaster sites with the practiced emotional calibration of a man who has learned that performing the feeling of concern is more politically durable than producing the outcomes concern is supposed to. Motivate. His speeches sound like policy. They are not policy. They are verbal commitments that create political cover without creating practical accountability. And this works in Springfield because the media covers the performance rather than the outcome, and because the electorate evaluates the performance rather than the outcome. The Bear Patrol episode is the show's most precise joke about the political economy of manufactured urgency. A bear appears near Springfield. Coverage is immediate and comprehensive. Emergency meetings are held, resources are deployed, a tax is levied to fund a permanent bear patrol. The bear had already left. The patrol is unnecessary. The tax is permanent. The show is describing exactly what happens in real policy environments when media-generated panic drives public spending. Programs created to address dramatized fears tend to outlast the fears that generated them. The political benefits of appearing to respond to public anxiety are immediate and significant. The political costs of dissolving the programs created in response are real and difficult to absorb. Homer's observation that the Bear Patrol seems to have worked since there have been no more bears is the logic that sustains real security spending long after the threat that justified it has diminished. Chief Wiggum is the show's portrait of law enforcement in a community where the rule of law is selectively applied based on who is asking for it. Wiggum is not corrupt in any theatrical sense. He does not take bags of cash in parking garages. His corruption is structural and mundane, the corruption of someone who has worked in the same community long enough that protecting the community and protecting his own comfortable position within it have become functionally indistinguishable. He responds to Burns's concerns. He does not respond to Homer's. This is not cartoon exaggeration. This is a description of how community policing actually functions when law enforcement agencies develop their institutional culture without sustained accountability to the communities they nominally serve. Springfield's city council meetings are the show's most accurate portrait of how local governance actually fails. Zoning decisions, planning determinations, budget allocations, these are the decisions that most directly shape the daily conditions of people's lives, and they are made in rooms that most residents never enter. By elected officials most residents cannot name, through processes most residents cannot follow. The people who show up to those meetings are systematically not a representative sample of the people whose lives the decisions affect. They are the people with the time, the knowledge, and the resources to participate, which means they are systematically the people whose interests are already better represented by the structural conditions of the community. The council serves the interests of those present. The people whose lives are most directly shaped by the decisions are least likely to be in the room. The outcomes are not surprising. Homer's civic participation is the show's ground-level view of how this system processes the average resident. He votes, he pays taxes, he occasionally attends a town hall when circumstances force it. He is a formal participant in the democratic process by every conventional measure. His actual influence over the decisions that shape his life is approximately zero, not because Homer is unusual in this respect, but because individual influence in a system that effectively concentrates decision-making authority is approximately what you would expect. What the show was always saying through 36 seasons of elections that changed nothing, civic processes that served the wrong people, and a mayor who managed appearances with the energy he declined to bring to actual governance is not that democracy is impossible. It is that democracy, like any institution, tends toward the failure modes of its structural conditions. A democracy organized around media performance will produce performers. A democracy where participation requires resources most people do not have will be governed by those who do. A democracy where the gap between political performance and political reality is in everyone's immediate interest to maintain will maintain it. Springfield's democracy keeps running. Elections happen. People vote. Quimby remains in office. Burns keeps the lights on. Homer keeps going back to the plant. The loop continues. And the joke, across all of it, is that everyone in Springfield believes the process is working because the process looks exactly the way a working process is supposed to look. The form is intact. The content departed some time ago. Nobody filed a report. Section 10. The environment and the things Springfield agreed not to notice. There is a mountain of evidence in Springfield that something is fundamentally wrong with the environment. The fish have 3 eyes. The river near the plant changes color. The air near the facility has qualities that air should not have. The wildlife in certain areas displays physical characteristics that suggest prolonged exposure to conditions incompatible with normal biology. The evidence is visible, measurable, and continuous. It has been there for decades. The people of Springfield know this. They have always known this. And they have developed, across all of that time, a collective unconscious machinery for not knowing it, not active denial. Something quieter and more durable, a shared agreement, maintained through social convention and economic logic, that certain things are simply what they are in Springfield and do not require the response they would demand anywhere else. This is the truth the show told about the environment more persistently and more precisely than anything else. That environmental destruction is not primarily an information problem. The people of Springfield have sufficient information to understand what is happening to their environment. They lack the structural conditions that would make acting on that information possible without threatening everything else their lives depend on. The nuclear plant is the economic spine of Springfield. It employs a significant portion of the working population. It provides all of the town's electrical power. It generates the tax base that funds every other municipal function. The town cannot function without it. And because the town cannot function without it, the town cannot afford to examine too closely what the plant does to the air and water and biology of every living thing in its vicinity. The economic dependency forecloses the examination not through any dramatic act of suppression, but through the quiet logic of a community that knows where its survival comes from. This is the precise mechanism by which environmental degradation persists in communities organized around a single extractive industry. Real towns built around real polluting employers have faced this exact structural trap repeatedly. People know their water is contaminated. They continue using it because they cannot afford alternatives, because the company responsible has resources to delay regulatory action, because official expertise is deployed to manufacture uncertainty about what the evidence means, because the immediate cost of resistance is certain and concrete, while the benefit is distant and probabilistic. Springfield and those towns are the same story. One is animated. Blinky, the three-eyed fish pulled from the river near the plant, is one of the show's most economically efficient images. The joke is that a fish has three eyes. The argument is that visible, measurable, documented environmental damage can be managed away through the combination of corporate public relations, political access, and the specific human capacity for accepting what is convenient. Burns is forced to eat Blinky on live television to prove the fish is safe. He eats it. The crisis is considered resolved. The river continues producing three-eyed fish. The water continues being what it is. The crisis was managed. That is not the same as being resolved. The show knows the difference. The Simpsons movie is the show's most theatrical environmental argument. The EPA determines that Springfield's contamination has reached the threshold requiring physical containment. The town is sealed under a dome. The community is isolated with the consequences of what the economic arrangements around it have produced, unable to leave the contamination, unable to address its cause, sealed inside the relationship between their dependence and the industry's dominance. The dome is obviously about more than pollution. It is about the trap itself. The way communities organized around polluting industries find themselves unable to leave and unable to reform. The dome makes visible a confinement that has been there the whole time, operating through economic and political mechanisms that are less dramatic than a giant glass enclosure, but functionally equivalent. Homer's body is the show's most sustained environmental argument expressed through character design. The things Homer has survived across 36 seasons, the injuries, the toxic exposures, the decades of proximity to an active nuclear facility form a picture of what happens to a biological system under conditions of chronic environmental stress. It was not designed to sustain. Homer does not appear sick in any obvious way. He appears to embody a specific kind of mutated resilience. He survives what should not be survivable. He heals from what should leave permanent damage. He absorbs punishment with a biological efficiency that suggests a body that has reorganized itself so thoroughly around the conditions of its environment that the environment has become its baseline. The adaptation is not admirable. It is the record of a body making the best available adjustment to toxic conditions, not thriving in any meaningful sense, but persisting, finding a way to keep functioning under conditions that should not be adaptable to. The adaptation comes at a cost. The cognitive function is compromised. The biological trade that purchased Homer's indestructibility is exactly what you would expect from a system optimizing for survival under continuous low-grade toxicity. Durability at the expense of processing capacity. The energy dependency argument runs through every episode involving the nuclear plant, which is most episodes. Springfield runs on Burns's electricity. Every light, every appliance, every system in the town depends on what the plant produces. And because the town cannot function without it, the town cannot challenge the conditions under which it is produced. This is the energy economy argument in miniature. A society organized around a specific energy source inherits a political relationship with the producer of that energy that constrains what it can demand, what it can acknowledge, and what it can change. The show never gave a lecture about this. It put the cooling towers in the opening credits. It put them in the background of establishing shots. It made them part of the visual grammar of Springfield so completely that they became wallpaper present in every episode, rarely foregrounded, always there. The same way the energy infrastructure is present in every aspect of modern life, shaping the conditions of everything else, without ever quite being the explicit subject of attention. The jokes about the nuclear plant are jokes about the nuclear plant. They are also accumulated across 36 seasons and nearly 800 episodes, a sustained argument about every extractive industry that has made itself indispensable to a community and used that indispensability as a shield against accountability. Every regulatory relationship captured by the regulated. Every community that looked at visible evidence and decided, for reasons it could articulate clearly and defend with real economic logic, that the evidence meant something other than what it appeared to mean. Springfield is every town that made that agreement. Blinky is every canary that stopped singing and was replaced. Burns is every executive who understood exactly what his operation was doing and kept it running. And Homer asleep at his console while the radiation hums around him, adapting and enduring and going back tomorrow, surviving in ways that nobody examines too closely, is the rest of us. Making the same accommodation, keeping the same job, drinking the same water. Living in the Springfield we built rather than looking clearly at the cost of living there. Section 11. Lisa Simpson and the cost of being right. Lisa Simpson is 8 years old. She has been 8 years old for 36 years, and across all of that time, in almost every episode in which she appears, she has been right about almost everything she cared about. She was right about the environmental contamination, right about the corruption in Springfield's political system, right about the inequalities the show's other characters preferred not to examine, right about the treatment of animals, about historical revisionism, about the conditions of her family's economic life and what those conditions meant for her own future. She was right, repeatedly and specifically and with evidence, about things that mattered. The reward for being right in Springfield is isolation, dismissal, the particular loneliness of being the person who sees clearly in a community organized around not seeing. Lisa's intelligence is the show's most direct argument about what happens to people who refuse to participate in collective denial, not in theory, but in the specific daily texture of a child's life in a community that finds her inconvenient. The show depicts Lisa's intelligence with real specificity. She is not generically smart in the way smart characters in family entertainment usually are gifted in a vague sense. The plot activates when required. Lisa reads constantly and widely. She plays saxophone with technical skill and genuine feeling. She engages with moral philosophy, environmental science, political theory, and literature with the serious attention of someone who finds these subjects genuinely compelling rather than academically obligatory. The show built a real mind and put it in an 8-year-old's body in Springfield and let the consequences unfold. The consequences are specific. Lisa is isolated from her peers, who do not know what to do with someone who thinks the way she thinks or cares about what she cares about. She is tolerated rather than embraced by adults, who find her earnestness tiring and her correctness uncomfortable. She is loved by her family with a completeness that does not quite require them to understand her, which is both the best thing they give her and the most painful limitation of what they can offer. She is alone in Springfield in the specific way of someone who can see the whole of a situation that everyone around them has agreed to see only part of. The show told the truth about what this kind of isolation does to a person over time. It does not make Lisa cruel or cynical. She remains genuinely idealistic, genuinely committed to her values, genuinely willing to fight for things she believes matter even when the fighting costs her socially. But the show does not pretend the fighting does not cost her. It depicts the weariness that accumulates in someone who has been the one person willing to say the uncomfortable thing in room after room for their entire life. Look at what happens to the intelligent women in this family. Lisa is brilliant. Lisa is a genius. Lisa has an IQ that dwarfs everyone in her household and most of the adults in Springfield. And what has that intelligence gotten her? Isolation, mockery, dismissal. Lisa speaks up and gets ignored. Lisa challenges authority and gets punished. Lisa tries to improve the world around her and gets crushed by the weight of a community that does not want to be improved. Lisa's intelligence is her greatest gift and her greatest burden because she wears it visibly. She announces herself as the smartest person in the room, and the room responds by making sure she understands how little that matters. The saxophone is the detail the show chose to make her relationship to her own inner life visible. When everything else has failed, when the town has not listened and the family has not understood and the world has not moved, Lisa plays. The saxophone is where what she is cannot be dismissed or isolated or made inconvenient. It is where her intelligence and her feeling exist in a form that requires nothing from anyone else, that is entirely hers, that the conditions of Springfield cannot reach. The show returns to the saxophone with the consistency of something that matters to the writers as much as it matters to the character. Every time Lisa plays alone in her room, in a dark auditorium, in a moment the show creates specifically for the image of this child with this instrument by herself, The show is doing something real about what it means to have an inner life that the outer world has no space for. The flash-forward episode gives Lisa a future that is exactly what her character would produce. Accomplished, principled, searching for the kind of connection that her intelligence makes difficult to find. She becomes the person the show always said she would become. The episode is beautiful, and the show closes the window immediately, returning Lisa to 8 years old. The future is sealed away. The permanent present resumes. The show's final truth about Lisa is the simplest one and the one it has been building toward from her first appearance. Being right is not enough. Caring is not enough. Intelligence and moral seriousness and genuine commitment to truth are not, in themselves, sufficient to change the conditions of the world you live in. What they are is a way of living with integrity, regardless of what the world does with that integrity. Lisa is the show's argument that this is worth doing, not because it wins, not because it produces outcomes proportional to the effort, but because the alternative is becoming Springfield. And Lisa has seen Springfield clearly. She has made her decision. She keeps going anyway. Section 12. Ned Flanders, and the tragedy of doing everything right. On the surface, Ned Flanders is everything Homer Simpson is not. Kind, generous, physically fit, financially responsible, devoutly religious, patient with his neighbors to a degree that borders on the physiologically impossible. By any objective measurement, a better person than Homer in almost every conceivable dimension. And the show punishes him for it, relentlessly. Specifically, with the consistency of someone making a point. Ned's wife Maude died because Homer was dodging t-shirts at the Springfield Speedway and they hit her instead. Homer's selfishness, in a specific moment, killed the woman Ned loved. And Ned forgave him, not because Ned does not feel things, not because the loss did not wound him in ways that did not heal, but because Ned's relationship to his own responses is not simple, and the show eventually tells you why. The episode is called Hurricane Neddy. After a hurricane destroys Ned's house and the community rebuilds it so poorly that it collapses on the first day, Ned breaks. He stands in the ruins and screams at everyone who has ever wronged him. He says things he has been holding for decades. He is raw and specific and devastating, and the audience laughs because the register is comedic, and then stops laughing because what is being expressed is not. The episode then reveals that Ned's relentless niceness is not a natural character trait. It is the product of childhood behavioral conditioning. Ned was a violent, uncontrollable child. His parents, beatnik types who did not believe in discipline, took him to a psychiatrist who spent years conditioning the aggression out of him. The treatment worked. The aggression was suppressed so completely that Ned cannot express it at all. What looks like extraordinary grace is a psychological cage built around a feral child by someone who mistook suppression for resolution. This changes everything about how Ned reads. His patience with Homer is not saintly. It is compulsive. He cannot express the rage that Homer's behavior generates in him because his brain was rewired in childhood to prevent it. His forgiveness after Maude's death is not an act of spiritual grace. It is the programmed response of a man whose psychology will not allow him to access the anger that would be the normal response to an abnormal loss. The forgiveness is real in the sense that it is what Ned feels. It is not freely chosen in the sense that it is available to him through conscious decision. The choice was made for him before he was old enough to make it for himself. The show's argument about Ned is that goodness, when manufactured rather than chosen, when built through suppression of complexity rather than integration of it, is a form of captivity. Ned is captive to his own niceness. He cannot be angry when anger would be appropriate. He cannot set limits that his own well-being requires. He cannot let the person he actually is, the complicated, wounded, sometimes dark person beneath the cheerful exterior, be known. The show also makes a point quietly about what faith does and does not provide to someone in Ned's situation. His faith gives him a framework for understanding his suffering that allows him to continue. God has a plan. The suffering has a purpose. The losses are part of something larger. This framework is real and it gets Ned through days that would break someone without it. The show does not mock this. The faith is depicted as genuine and the comfort it provides is real. And then the show shows you, in the same continuity, that God talks to Homer and has never spoken to Ned. The man who has organized his entire life around the relationship with God that his faith promises, who has done everything the institutional expression of that faith prescribes, has not received the contact that Homer, who has done almost none of those things, has received multiple times. This is not a comedic observation. It is one of the most disturbing things the show has placed on screen, and it places it there without comment, trusting the audience to carry the weight of it. Homer's life, by external measures, is far less admirable than Ned's. He has failed at almost everything that conventional measures track. He is a mediocre employee, an unreliable neighbor, an imperfect father, a husband who takes more than he gives. By the measures Ned has spent his life optimizing toward, Homer is a failure. And Homer is alive in a way Ned is not. There is something in Homer that is fully present in access to his own joy and desire and uncomplicated love for the people around him that Ned's conditioning has made unavailable in the same form. Homer cannot suppress himself. The self keeps getting out. And the self that gets out, for all its limitations and its failures and its damage, is human in a way that Ned's performed goodness sometimes is not. The show puts these two men next door to each other and lets the contrast run for 36 years without resolving it. Homer does not become Ned. Ned does not become Homer. Neither approach is vindicated or condemned. What the show does is show you both clearly, with enough accumulated time that you understand what each costs and what it provides, and leaves the question of which one you would choose sitting with you long after the episode ends. Ned Flanders is the show's most honest portrait of a specifically American kind of failure, not the dramatic failure of the villain or the tragic failure of the hero. The quiet failure of a person who did everything correctly and found that correct performance is not the same as a full life. Section 13. Mona Simpson, Burns, and 3 generations of damage. For the first 6 seasons of The Simpsons, Homer's mother was dead. That was the official story. Abe Simpson, Homer's father, told him his mother had passed when Homer was young. He showed Homer a grave. Homer mourned in his particular way, which is to say, incompletely and with more confusion than clarity. He grew up believing he was a boy whose mother had died and whose father was too cold and distant to fill what she had left behind. That belief shaped Homer in ways the show spent years building, and then revealed with the kind of precision that requires having known all along where you were heading. Homer's desperate need for approval, his clinginess toward Marge, his terror of abandonment, his compulsive need to be liked by everyone around him, his willingness to endure humiliation and exploitation from his employer rather than risk losing the one stable thing his life contains. His entire personality, viewed through the lens of the revelation that comes in Season 7, is a coping mechanism for a loss that was a lie. In Season 7, the show revealed that Mona Simpson was alive, gone because she had to be. Because staying would have put Homer and Abe in danger. Because the man Homer would grow up to work for without ever knowing the connection had destroyed her life and forced her underground. The story goes back to 1969. Mona was a housewife in Springfield, married to Abe, mother to Homer, who was around 6 years old. Then she was radicalized. The world outside was burning through the civil rights movement and the counterculture and the protests against Vietnam, and Mona started paying attention to it. She joined a group of activists who targeted a biological weapons laboratory owned by Mr. Burns, not the nuclear plant, a separate facility, a germ warfare laboratory in Springfield, where Burns was manufacturing weaponized pathogens in the same community where children were growing up and families were living their lives without any knowledge of what was happening down the road. Burns was making biological weapons in Springfield. Mona and her group broke in. They destroyed the biological agent stored there. They were right to do it. The show is explicit about this. The cause was legitimate and the action was appropriate. And then Mona made one mistake. As the group fled, she stopped to help someone who had been knocked down in the chaos. That person was Burns. She stopped to help the man whose weapons she had just destroyed, and Burns saw her face. He identified her. He reported her to the FBI. From that moment forward, Mona Simpson was a fugitive. She could not go home. She could not contact her family. She could not hold her son or explain to him why she was leaving. She kissed Homer goodbye while he was sleeping and disappeared into the night. Homer woke up and his mother was gone. His father told him she was dead. And Homer spent the next 27 years believing he was the kind of son a mother would rather be dead than raise. Believing there was something fundamentally wrong with him. Believing the absence proved something about his worth. Burns pursued Mona actively for decades. He held a personal grudge against a woman who destroyed his weapons lab and used his resources to ensure she could never return. When she finally comes back to Springfield in season 7, Burns recognizes her immediately through a cab window and calls the authorities. The FBI shows up. Mona has to flee again. Homer has to say goodbye to his mother for the second time. And this time he knows who forced her out. He knows the man responsible is his own employer. And Homer does not connect the dots. He does not confront Burns. He does not quit. He does not even seem to fully process the connection between the billionaire who signs his checks and the billionaire who stole his mother. The show does not play this as a joke. It plays it as tragedy. Because Homer is not capable of making that connection in any sustained way. The damage is too deep. The cognitive erosion too complete. Homer is too far inside the system that destroyed him to see the system clearly. The conspiracy that emerges from Mona's story is one of the bleakest things the show has built. Burns did not just ruin Mona's life. In ruining hers, he engineered Homer's. By driving Mona away when Homer was 6, Burns ensured Homer would grow up emotionally damaged in exactly the way that makes someone most exploitable as a worker. Desperate for approval. Incapable of sustained resistance. Terrified of abandonment. Grateful for any scrap of recognition. The perfect employee for a man who needs someone in Sector 7G who will keep coming back regardless of what the job costs him. The show confirmed this architecture in a later revelation. Burns and Grandpa Simpson made a deal. Burns had committed a crime, and Abe discovered it. In exchange for Abe's silence, Burns guaranteed Homer would have a job at the plant no matter what, no matter how many errors he made, no matter how many times he should have been fired. Homer's job security was not a cartoon convenience. It was a contractual obligation between his father and his mother's persecutor, brokered in silence and never explained to Homer because explaining it would require explaining everything else. Homer's mother was a radical who fought against a billionaire's weapons program. That billionaire retaliated by destroying her family. Her husband covered up the truth and made a deal with the enemy. Her son grew up believing he was worthless, became cognitively limited through environmental poisoning and physical brain damage, and spent his entire adult life working for the man who took his mother away from him. 3 generations of one family broken by one man's grudge. Mona died in a later season. Homer sits beside her. He holds her hand. He watches the mother he barely knew leave for the last time. No joke. No cutaway. No reset. Just a man and his mother and 27 stolen years pressing down on both of them. The show that is almost always a comedy gave this scene the weight it required. It did not undercut it. The Simpsons is a comedy. But underneath the jokes, underneath every fall and recovery and reset, there is this story. A family systematically broken by one man's power and one town's inability to resist it. Mona fought back and lost everything. Abe made his deal and buried the truth. Homer inherited the consequences and never understood why his life felt the weight it felt. Burns won. He always wins. Because in Springfield, the man with the money writes the rules. And the rules said Homer Simpson would report to Sector 7G for as long as he could walk because his grandfather made a deal, because his mother made a choice, because the richest man in town needed a broken man in that specific seat. And Homer was broken before he ever clocked in. Section 14. The predictions. Why the show kept getting the future right. In the year 2000, a Simpsons episode depicted Donald Trump as a former president of the United States, referenced in the context of a future American political situation that had gone sideways. The episode aired 16 years before Trump was elected. 16 years. The internet noticed when it happened. The screenshots went viral. The phrase "The Simpsons predicted" it entered the language as a shorthand for a phenomenon that the show has been associated with ever since. The list of apparent predictions is long and well documented. A device resembling a modern smartwatch in 1995. A flu pandemic originating in Asia causing mass panic and supply shortages in 1993. The Disney acquisition of Fox in 1998. A Homer-written equation that appears to anticipate a property of the Higgs boson particle before it was experimentally confirmed in 2012. Cypress Hill performing with the London Symphony Orchestra depicted as a joke, actually happened at the Royal Albert Hall in 2024, 28 years later. The specific visual of a political figure descending an escalator to announce a campaign shown on the show before the real moment occurred. The executive producers addressed this directly. Al Jean's summary: "If you throw enough darts, you will get some bullseyes." Bill Oakley put it even more plainly: "There are very few genuine predictions, mostly coincidence and the cyclical nature of history." Fact-checking organizations have confirmed that many apparent predictions are misattributed, involve Treehouse of Horror episodes outside canonical continuity, or are general observations about trend lines already in motion. This is all accurate, and it is not the complete picture. The more interesting argument is not whether the show predicted specific events. It is how the show was positioned to generate accurate extrapolations in the first place. The writing staff at the show's peak was composed of people with elite educational backgrounds and genuine expertise in multiple fields, with a professional orientation toward observing American culture, with the specific attention of people whose job was to identify what was absurd about it. These are precisely the people most likely to look at a current trend and correctly extrapolate its logical extension. They did not predict Trump's presidency by accident. They observed that Trump had been publicly flirting with running for office since the late 1980s and wrote a joke about the logical endpoint of the trend they were watching. The joke turned out to be accurate because the trend continued. The Trump prediction is worth examining specifically because it is the one that most challenges the coincidence explanation. The episode did not simply predict that a celebrity might become president someday. It specified Trump by name. It placed him in the Oval Office. It depicted the consequences of his presidency as the kind of fiscal and institutional disorder that critics would later describe using almost identical language. This is not a vague trend extrapolation. This is a specific prediction about a specific person that was accurate in its specifics, made 16 years in advance. The meta-theory that explains the phenomenon better than either pure coincidence or prophecy is about cultural influence. The Simpsons is one of the most watched, most quoted, most deeply embedded pieces of American media in history. Its jokes have become part of the cultural vocabulary. When the show depicts Trump becoming president as a joke about the absurdity of American celebrity politics, that joke enters the cultural bloodstream. It becomes a reference point. It primes the cultural imagination, makes the idea feel less like a shocking impossibility and more like something that has already been acknowledged, processed, even laughed at. When Trump actually runs and wins, it does not feel like shock. It feels like recognition. We have seen this before. The show did not predict the future. The show made the future feel familiar before it arrived. The show did not predict the Disney-Fox merger. The show made media consolidation feel like an inevitable punchline. When Disney actually bought Fox, the cultural response was not surprise. It was a kind of weary recognition. Of course they did. The Simpsons already told us this was coming. Springfield does not reflect America. At some point, America began reflecting Springfield. The show held up a mirror for 36 years and people stared into it long enough that they started to resemble what they saw. The corrupt politician who manages appearances. The billionaire who poisons the community he claims to serve. The population too distracted and too economically dependent to mount sustained resistance. The endless cycle of catastrophe and reset. Springfield was not a prediction of where America was heading. It was a diagnosis of where America already was. The show just wrote it down first. And here is the thing that the viral screenshot culture around the predictions misses almost entirely. The show has made thousands of observations that have not come true. Jokes about jetpacks. Jokes about political outcomes that went differently. Jokes about cultural developments that never materialized. Nobody shares those. Nobody builds mythology around the predictions that were simply wrong. Confirmation bias operates in one direction. We remember the hits, we forget the misses. And when you apply confirmation bias to nearly 800 episodes across 36 years, the highlight reel of accurate predictions looks like prophecy, even though the full record includes spectacular misses. The predictions are not supernatural. They are the natural result of a brilliantly observed show running for an impossibly long time, staffed by highly educated observers of American culture, producing more satirical content than any other show in television history, and then having that content filtered through the most powerful confirmation bias engine ever created, which is the internet. The Simpsons did not predict the future. It wrote so many possible futures that some of them were bound to materialize. The ones that did are the only ones anyone remembers. But try telling that to the next person who sends you a screenshot from 1997 that lines up perfectly with a headline from today. Because even knowing exactly how the trick works, it is still something to watch. Section 15. The Town That Cannot Be Found. Springfield is the most famous fictional town in American history. More people can name Springfield than can name the capital of half the actual states in the country. It has a nuclear power plant, a harbor, a gorge, a tire fire, a monorail, an elementary school, a prison, 2 hospitals, and a mountain range visible from the front yard of a house that also appears to be near an ocean. It borders Ohio, Nevada, Maine, and Kentucky, depending on which episode you are watching. It exists in every climate simultaneously. Its geography is an impossibility, and the show has been maintaining that impossibility deliberately for 36 years. Matt Groening admitted in a 2012 interview that he named the town after Springfield, Oregon, where he grew up. For approximately 48 hours, the question of Springfield's location was technically answered. Then the show continued airing new episodes that placed Springfield in geographic contexts incompatible with Oregon, and the writers made no effort to honor the admission. The mystery reconstituted itself as though the confession had never happened. This was not accidental. Springfield's geographic ambiguity is not a production oversight or a continuity failure. It is a design feature, the most carefully maintained running joke in the series. The show has spent 36 years actively preventing Springfield from being locatable, not through carelessness, but through consistent, deliberate contradiction. Every time an episode provides a clue that seems to narrow the possibilities, a subsequent episode provides a clue that overrides it. The clues are not mistakes. They are deliberate misdirections in a game the show has no intention of ending. The surface argument for this is simple, and the creators have made it explicitly. Springfield is everywhere. It is every American town. A Springfield in Oregon is not your Springfield. A Springfield without a fixed location belongs to everyone. The universality is the point. This is true. And the geographic impossibility has implications that go beyond the desire for universal audience identification, and the show has been aware of those implications. A town that cannot be found cannot be regulated consistently, cannot be inspected by a permanent regulatory authority, cannot have its nuclear plant assessed by a fixed state environmental agency, cannot have its mayor held accountable by a consistent state attorney general's office. Springfield floats between jurisdictions because floating is safer than landing. Landing means accountability. Accountability means someone shows up with documentation and starts asking questions about the three-eyed fish and the cracked cooling towers, and the man who has been running the local economy for longer than most state governments have been operating. The geographic uncertainty of Springfield is the same collective denial mechanism that operates everywhere else in the show, just expressed at the level of the town's relationship to regulatory authority. The show that depicts a town voting to make truth illegal, a town that resets after every catastrophe, has also built that town in a location that cannot be pinned down and therefore cannot be held to account. The geography is part of the denial. The denial extends all the way to the map. The Principal and the Pauper is the show's most explicit depiction of this denial mechanism made institutional. A man walks into Springfield with proof that the principal is an imposter who stole his identity 2 decades earlier. The proof is unambiguous. The real Seymour Skinner is standing in front of the community, and the town votes to keep the lie. Judge Snyder issues a legal decree declaring the imposter to be the real Skinner. The actual Seymour Skinner, the decorated veteran, the prisoner of war survivor, the man whose life was stolen, is tied to a railroad car and physically expelled from Springfield. And it is made explicitly illegal to ever mention the truth again. The fan response to this episode was immediate and intense, and almost uniformly negative. Critics called it the moment the show stopped caring about its own continuity. Harry Shearer publicly objected. The episode is consistently ranked among the series' worst. But here is the thing nobody wants to acknowledge. The episode is completely honest about what Springfield is. It just says the quiet part out loud. Springfield has always operated this way. The town has always chosen comfortable lies over uncomfortable truths. The town has always agreed to forget whatever does not fit the narrative. The only difference is that this episode showed you the mechanism. It showed you the vote. It showed you the legal decree. It showed you the literal expulsion of truth from the community. Every other time Springfield forgets a catastrophe or ignores a contradiction, it happens off-screen. This episode let you watch it happen in real time. The real Seymour Skinner was Springfield's canary in the coal mine. He showed up with proof that the official narrative was a lie. The town's response was not to thank him for the truth, it was to criminalize the truth and exile the messenger. That is not a comedy beat. That is the show telling you exactly how Springfield maintains its impossible reality through consensus, through denial, through the systematic removal of anyone who insists on facts the community has voted to retire. And if you are paying attention, you realize that Springfield has been doing this the entire time. With the radiation, with the contaminated water, with the billionaire who glows in the dark, with the fish with 3 eyes, with everything the town has seen and agreed, by unspoken vote, not to truly know, Springfield will never be located. Not because the show cannot decide. Because the show decided long ago that Springfield is more useful as a mystery than as an answer. A town that could be anywhere is a town that belongs to everyone. And a town that belongs to everyone is a town nobody can shut down. Section 16. The Floating Timeline and Why Nobody Ages. Bart Simpson was 10 years old when the show debuted in December 1989. He is 10 years old right now. Lisa was 8. Lisa is still 8. Homer and Marge were in their mid-30s. They remain in their mid-30s. Maggie has been 1 year old for 36 years. The industry term for this is a floating timeline. The present of the show is always the present of the viewer. The year changes, the technology changes, the cultural references change. The characters do not. They exist in temporal suspension where everything around them evolves and they remain fixed. Most people accept this without much examination because long-running animated shows all do something like it. The explanation that satisfies most discussions is that this is simply how animated shows work, and that is correct, as far as it goes. But The Simpsons has been running long enough that the floating timeline has created contradictions so massive and so strange that they have started to behave less like production conventions and more like evidence of something. The most obvious problem is the backstory. When the show began, Homer and Marge's history was grounded in the late 1970s and early 1980s. Their courtship was set in a specific era with era-appropriate music and fashion and cultural reference points. Their origin story made sense for parents in their mid-30s in 1989. But as the floating timeline dragged the present forward, the backstory had to move with it. If Homer and Marge are still in their mid-30s in 2024, they did not meet in 1978. They met somewhere in the early 2000s. Their high school experience was not defined by Watergate and disco. It was defined by early social media and reality television. The show has depicted this shift explicitly. In later flashback episodes, Homer and Marge's youth has been rewritten to include references to the 1990s, then the 2000s, then the 2010s. Their origin story has been told and retold at least 4 times, each version placing their formative years in a different decade. They were grunge fans. Then Y2K era 20-somethings. Their history is not a fixed accumulation of specific events. It is a draft that gets revised every few years as the present moves forward and the characters refuse to move with it. Homer and Marge do not have a stable past. Their history reshapes itself to fit a present that never changes. They live in a permanent present, constructed by an endlessly revised past. They do not have a history the way real people have histories, as a fixed accumulation of specific events that can be returned to and examined. They have a history the way myths do, as a set of stories that get retold and adjusted to serve whoever is doing the telling. Apply the theories and the floating timeline becomes less strange, not more. The coma theory says nobody ages because they exist inside the frozen mind of a man who went to sleep in April 1993. His children cannot grow up because he was not there to see it happen. His wife does not grow older because the last time he saw her, she looked exactly as she looks in every episode. His friends and neighbors are preserved at the moment of the coma because that is the only version of them his unconscious mind has to work with. The floating timeline is not a production convention under this reading. It is the most psychologically accurate formal choice the show could have made. The radiation theory says nobody ages because the biological mechanisms governing cellular aging have been altered by decades of nuclear exposure. The mutations that gave Blinky 3 eyes also altered the resident's relationship with time, not freezing aging exactly, but redirecting it into other forms of biological change while leaving the conventional markers of time's passage absent. The collective denial theory says nobody ages because Springfield has voted to agree they do not age. The same social mechanism that voted to keep Armin Tamzarian as Principal Skinner has also decided that these specific people remain these specific ages. The community requires Homer and Marge to remain who they were when the community organized itself around them. Allowing them to age would require allowing the town to age, to acknowledge the decades that have passed and confront what those decades have done and failed to do. The town will not do this, so the characters do not age. All three theories arrive at the same place from different directions. Time does not work in Springfield. Something, whether it is the radiation or the coma or the collective denial or some combination of all three, has broken the normal flow of time for everyone who lives there. The show has imagined its characters aging multiple times. The flash-forward episodes give you Lisa at 23, Bart as an adult, Homer and Marge in their 60s. The futures are detailed and emotionally rich and completely consistent with who these characters have always been. The show can imagine their futures. It declines to live in them. This is the show's thesis. The Simpsons are frozen in time because we need them to be, because they represent something we cannot afford to let age. The messy, chaotic, loving, infuriating, indestructible American family. The family that survives everything and recovers from everything and resets after every disaster and starts fresh every Sunday night. The family that keeps coming home. We pressed pause in 1989 and never pressed play. We need them to be there, in that house, at those ages, cycling through the same dynamics and the same disasters and the same recoveries, because as long as they are there, we can sit down and turn on the television and feel that the version of America they represent is still intact. The floating timeline is not a production convenience. It is the most honest thing the show has ever said about why we keep watching it. The characters do not age because we will not let them. The loop does not break because we maintain it. And every time we tune in, every time we laugh at the same family doing their version of the same things they have always done, we tighten the loop a little more. If the loop ever broke, if Bart actually turned 11, if Lisa actually left for college, if Homer actually retired, the show would not just end. Something else would end with it. Some version of a belief we did not know we were holding, about the permanence of a certain kind of family in a certain kind of American life. The belief that somewhere, even now, the kids are still young and the beer is still cold and nobody has had to say goodbye yet. The Simpsons are trapped in the loop. So are we. We built it together. And neither of us, after 36 years of this, knows how to let go. Section 17. The Homer Coma Theory. On the 1st of April 1993, the 18th episode of Season 4 aired. It was called So It's Come to This, a Simpsons clip show. Bart plays a series of escalating April Fool's pranks on Homer. One involves placing a beer can in an industrial paint shaker. When Homer opens it, the explosion sends him to the hospital. While lying in his hospital bed, Homer tries to reach a vending machine across the room. The machine tips over and crushes him. Homer falls into a genuine clinical coma. The episode resolves with Homer waking up when Bart tearfully confesses at his bedside. The family laughs, Homer laughs, everything returns to normal. Before the episode ends, Homer is told that during the coma, he permanently lost 5% of his brain function. 5% gone, unrecoverable. Homer's response to learning he has sustained permanent brain damage is to laugh without understanding why he is laughing. The family finds this charming. Nobody finds it alarming. The coma theory, originally formulated in extended form online, proposes that Homer never actually woke up, that the scene where he springs awake is itself part of the dream, the dreaming brain providing its own resolution narrative, the fantasy of recovery that prevents the mind from being forced to stop. Every episode since that date, across 32 more years of television, is Homer's unconscious mind generating an ongoing fantasy of his family and his life from a hospital bed in Springfield General, where his body has been lying since the spring of 1993. The evidence the theory organizes around is real. Before the coma episode, The Simpsons was a grounded show. Not realistic exactly, it was always a cartoon, but grounded in recognizable domestic situations. Homer tries to quit drinking, Marge considers infidelity. Lisa gets a crush on a substitute teacher. Bart might be held back a year. These are everyday family problems told through comedy, rooted in situations real families encounter. After the coma, everything changes. Homer goes to space. Mr. Burns captures the Loch Ness Monster. Homer joins a secret society. Homer finds his mother is a fugitive radical. Homer meets God twice. The show goes from a family sitcom grounded in economic anxiety to a show where the main character has traveled to dozens of countries, held hundreds of different jobs, survived physical trauma that would kill a platoon of Marines. The escalation is so dramatic that it has been the subject of fan debate for decades under the name The Decline of The Simpsons. The coma theory argues this is not a decline. It is Homer's brain getting worse, the dreams becoming less coherent as the neural damage accumulates. 6 months before the coma episode, in the Season 4 premiere Homer the Heretic, Homer had a face-to-face conversation with God. God told Homer that he would learn the meaning of life, but not yet. God said Homer's time was coming. 6 months later, Homer was in a coma. The theory reads this not as a theological gag, but as a prophecy the show placed deliberately. God told Homer his waking life was nearly up, and 6 months later, Homer's conscious life ended. What the show presents as a quirky theological joke reads under this theory as foreshadowing. The aging problem. This is the single piece of evidence that the coma theory explains most elegantly. Nobody in The Simpsons ages. Bart has been 10 years old for 36 years. Lisa has been 8. Maggie has been 1. Every theory attempts to explain this. The radiation theory says mutated biology prevents aging. The cartoon logic explanation says it is just how animated shows work. But the coma theory has the simplest and most emotionally devastating answer. Nobody ages because they exist inside the mind of a man who went to sleep in April 1993 and never woke up. His children do not age because he was not there to see them grow. His wife does not age because the last time he saw her, she looked exactly like that. His friends do not change because his memory of them is frozen at the moment the vending machine fell. Homer's coma preserves his world exactly as it was on the day he lost it, because that is what coma does to the mind. It locks you in place. The celebrity appearances that flood the later seasons make a different kind of sense under this theory. Homer's dreaming brain receives ambient stimuli from the hospital room, the television in the background, conversations of medical staff and family, the radio. It processes names and voices and cultural references and incorporates them into the dream world. Every celebrity who appears in Springfield is a voice Homer heard through the fog of unconsciousness, translated into a dream character by a brain desperately maintaining the simulation. The later seasons are flooded with these appearances because the ambient stimuli accumulate over time. The show acknowledged the coma theory directly in Season 34. An episode included a deliberately leaked, fake deleted scene in which Homer wakes from a long coma and reveals that every outlandish episode was a dream. The scene was then identified as a hoax, a planted red herring. The writers animated a coma awakening, showed it to the audience, and said it was not real. The fact that they made it at all tells you something. The writers know the theory, they have engaged with it, they acknowledged it holds together, and their denial came wrapped inside a scene that explicitly depicted the thing they were denying Homer waking from a coma. They showed you the truth and told you it was a joke. The audience laughed. Just like Homer laughed when he was told he had permanently lost 5% of his brain. Executive producer Al Jean addressed the theory in 2015. He said it is not true. He dismissed it as fan speculation. He did not explain why nobody ages. He did not explain the tonal shift after Season 4. He did not explain why God told Homer his time was coming 6 months before the coma. He just said it was not true, and the interviewer moved on. The fans did not move on. Because the theory does something that no official explanation has done, it makes the show make sense as a complete emotional object. The aging freeze, the tonal shift, the celebrity flood, the increasingly surreal plots, the reset button that erases consequences between episodes, Homer surviving anything and recovering from anything. All of it explained by one consistent premise. His body is in a hospital bed. His mind is in Springfield. His mind cannot kill him because his mind is the one telling the story. And if the coma theory is true, the show's emotional core is not comedy. It is something older and harder to look at directly. Homer's deepest wish is the simplest one imaginable. He wants his family. He wants Marge to still love him. He wants Bart to still be his mischievous boy. He wants Lisa to still play her saxophone. He wants Maggie to still be small enough to hold. He wants Friday night at the Simpsons house to last forever. And in the coma, it does. The dream gives him exactly what he wants. His family preserved, his children never growing up in a way, his wife never leaving, his life never ending. The coma is not a nightmare. It is the only version of heaven a man like Homer Simpson would ever ask for. A house on Evergreen Terrace where the kids are always young and the beer is always cold and nobody ever has to say goodbye. And every time Homer survives something impossible, every time the world resets, every time the credits roll and everything returns to normal, it is not lazy writing. It is Homer's brain refusing to let the story end. Because if the story ends, if the dream collapses, then Homer has to wake up. And waking up means finding out how much time has actually passed, how old his children really are, whether Marge waited, whether anyone is still sitting by his bed, or worse, not waking up at all. That is the coma theory. Homer Simpson has been dreaming since April 1993. Every episode since then is a love letter from an unconscious father to the family he cannot reach. The show will never confirm this. The evidence is baked into the structure of the show itself. Nobody ages. Reality gets stranger each season. Homer always finds his way home by the end of the episode, because in the dream, he never left. Section 18. The supporting cast. What the background characters are actually saying. There is a man named Hans Moleman in Springfield. He is small and elderly and nearly blind and exists primarily to suffer. He gets hit by cars. He gets buried alive. He gets eaten by animals, struck by lightning, and incinerated. He has been killed, by conservative estimate, more times than any character in the history of American animation. And then he appears in the next episode completely unchanged. No explanation. No resurrection. No acknowledgement that he was dead 2 episodes ago. He just shows up again, ready for whatever is coming next. Most discussions treat this as a running gag. It is. It is also, under sustained examination, something more interesting. Moleman once stated his age as 31 years old. Look at him. He appears to be in his 80s or 90s, shrunken, trembling, barely ambulatory. If he is telling the truth, something catastrophic happened to a man in the prime of his life that aged him 40 or 50 years beyond his chronological age. Something that also made death a revolving door for him rather than a terminal condition. The radiation theory has an answer. The collective denial theory has an answer. Springfield has agreed not to notice Moleman's death cycle the way it has agreed not to notice everything else that should be alarming. The coma theory has a third answer. Moleman is a background process in Homer's dream, a minor character whose continuity Homer's unconscious mind does not maintain carefully. He dies because the dreaming brain lets him lapse. He returns because the dream requires him to populate the next crowd scene. But the most interesting answer is the one the show builds through accumulation. Moleman is what the margins of Springfield contain. He is the person nobody is quite paying attention to, dying in plain sight, in public, repeatedly, and receiving no sustained attention from anyone. The people around him react briefly to each individual death and then resume what they were doing. The deaths accumulate without accumulating any social consequence. No investigation, no inquiry into the pattern. No recognition that something unusual is happening to this specific person in this specific town. This is the collective denial mechanism expressed in its most extreme comedic form. A man dies in front of you. You react briefly. You move on. He comes back and you do not wonder why, because wondering why would pull a thread that connects to things you have decided not to think about. Chief Wiggum is the show's portrait of law enforcement in a community where the rule of law is applied selectively. Wiggum is not corrupt in any theatrical sense. His corruption is structural and mundane. The corruption of someone who has worked in the same community long enough that protecting the community and protecting his own comfortable position within it have become functionally identical in his mind. He responds to Burns's concerns. He does not respond to Homer's. This is not cartoon exaggeration. It is a description of how community policing actually functions when law enforcement agencies develop their institutional culture without sustained accountability. Sideshow Bob is the show's most thorough examination of what happens when genuine intelligence and genuine grievance combine with insufficient moral structure. Bob is unambiguously more intelligent than almost everyone in Springfield. He is also the show's most persistent antagonist, not because intelligence and villainy are related, but because the show is interested in what happens to superior intelligence when the world it inhabits consistently refuses to reward it through legitimate channels. Bob's elaborate vendettas are not simply evil. They are the expression of someone who decided the legitimate channels were not available to him and chose the illegitimate ones instead. The comedy is in the elaborateness of the schemes. The argument underneath is in the pattern. What does ability do when the world will not accept it? Krusty is the show's portrait of the entertainer who has been performing for so long that the performance and the person are no longer distinguishable even to himself. He has been playing a version of himself on television since before most of his audience was born. The audience's love for the character is real and has sustained him through decades of personal failures that the character could not survive if they became public knowledge. But the character has been maintained. Herschel Schmoikel Pinchas Yaruchum Krustovsky, the person beneath the costume, is a complicated and disappointed man who has been inside the costume for so long that the difference between them is not reliably available to him. This is the show's observation about performance and identity in a culture organized around media celebrity. The longer you perform a version of yourself for a large audience, the more that performance colonizes your actual self. The authentic self, the one that exists independently of the audience's expectations and the character's requirements, gets harder to access. Krusty is funny. He is also the show's most precise portrait of what a lifetime of public performance does to the person doing the performing. Springfield's background population is not decorative. Each recurring background character turns out, under scrutiny, to be the show making a specific argument about a specific kind of person in a specific position in American life. The show built Springfield by populating it with specific arguments, wearing character costumes, and then let those characters live alongside each other for decades, creating through their interactions a portrait of a community that is both clearly absurd and clearly recognizable to anyone who has lived in a real one. Section 9:18. The Couch Gag and Other Rituals. What the show's structure is saying. Every episode of The Simpsons opens the same way. The camera moves through clouds. Springfield resolves from aerial view. The title card appears. Bart writes something on the chalkboard, a different message each time, repeated until the bell rings. Lisa plays her saxophone in the school hallway and gets escorted out. Homer drives home from the plant and nearly hits a pedestrian. The family converges on the couch from different directions and sits down, and the couch gag happens. This opening has been running for 36 years. It has become so embedded in the cultural memory of multiple generations that most people who grew up watching the show can begin the saxophone melody in their heads without prompting and feel a specific kind of anticipation before the first joke of the episode has been made. The couch gag is discussed as a formal device, a way to vary the opening, a creative playground, a signal of register. Some of the most celebrated are the ones that use the format to do something formally radical. The Don Hertzfeldt couch gag, the one that tells the history of the universe, the ones directed by guest artists who bring radically different visual sensibilities to the established format. These get written about as artistic statements, which they are. But the standard couch gag, the family converging from different directions and sitting down together, is doing something that does not get discussed in those terms. It is building the ritual of return into the structure of the show. Every episode of The Simpsons ends with the same gesture. The family home, the family together, in the specific shared space that is both the most mundane place in Springfield and the place the show consistently returns to as its anchor. The couch is the show's thesis expressed as architecture. Not where the adventure happens, where the adventure ends. Whatever Homer did today, whatever Bart got in trouble for, whatever Lisa's crusade produced or failed to produce, they end up on the couch, together. In the configuration of a family that keeps returning to the same place, this is not sentimental coincidence. The show built this structure deliberately and has maintained it across every season. The return to the couch is the non-negotiable endpoint of every episode's movement. No matter how extreme the adventure, how far the characters traveled, or how badly things went, the resolution is always the couch. The family returns. The loop closes. The next episode will open with the same clouds and the same family arriving at the same couch. The ritual is the argument. The show is not arguing that the Simpson family is admirable or their life aspirational, nor are the conditions of their existence acceptable. The show has been honest about all of those things for 36 years. What the show argues, through the ritual of the couch, is that the return is the point, that the thing worth preserving across all the adventures and disasters and catastrophes and failures is the family's capacity to keep returning to the same place together. The chalkboard gag is the show's other formal ritual, and it deserves more attention than it gets. Bart writes the same line repeatedly until the bell rings a different statement each episode, often a joke, occasionally a pointed observation delivered in the register of a 10-year-old's detention. The form is punishment. The content is freedom. Bart is being made to repeat something as discipline, and what he is repeating is the show's most compressed form of comedic truth-telling, a single sentence written over and over, filling the screen with its repetition. The repetition is formal and the show knows it. Writing something 100 times does not change the thing. Bart has written hundreds of different sentences on that chalkboard, and none of them has changed anything in Springfield, any more than Lisa's correct identifications of problems have changed anything, or Homer's awareness of his own situation has changed anything. The chalkboard gag is the show's most direct formal statement about the relationship between observation and change. You can say the true thing clearly and correctly and repeatedly, and the world does not automatically reorganize itself in response. Bart writes on the chalkboard. The bell rings. He leaves. The next episode opens with the same clouds. The Treehouse of Horror episodes are the show's formal permission structure for saying things the regular episodes cannot. 3 horror anthology segments, operating outside canonical continuity, in which the rules governing Springfield are suspended. Homer can be killed. The town can be genuinely destroyed. Society can collapse. The Treehouse format is the show giving itself permission, once a season, to follow its premises to their actual conclusions. These episodes are also where the show's anxieties about its own premise surface most clearly. The segment where Springfield's residents become increasingly conformist due to media addiction. The segment where human society is organized around the entertainment preferences of alien overlords who need humans to keep watching. The segment where the apocalypse arrives and turns out to be unremarkable because everyone was already living in conditions that looked like the end of the world from certain angles. These are Treehouse premises that are barely distinguishable from the premises of regular episodes, except that in Treehouse they are allowed to conclude. The show's formal rituals, the couch, the chalkboard, the treehouse, the opening sequence are collectively a meta-argument about what the show is doing. They say, this is a loop. This loop is intentional. The loop repeats because the loop is the content. What we are watching is not a narrative moving toward a conclusion. It is a pattern being maintained, a family being preserved at a specific moment in time, a set of arguments being repeated with variations until the audience understands them from every angle. The ritual structure of the show is the most complete, formal expression of the floating timeline and the collective denial and the emotional weight of accumulation. It is a show that keeps coming back to the same place because coming back to the same place is what the show has always been about. Section 20. What the show understood about class that American TV almost never does. American television has a complicated relationship with economic class. The most common approach is to ignore it entirely, to populate shows with families whose economic resources are mysteriously adequate to their lifestyles without ever being discussed, because discussing economic constraint makes audiences uncomfortable. The second most common approach is to sentimentalize it, to depict working-class families as noble in their poverty, their lack of resources producing a compensating abundance of authentic human connection that makes the arithmetic of their lives feel aspirational rather than unjust. The Simpsons did neither of these things. The show depicted economic class with a specificity and a consistency across 36 seasons that is essentially without comparison in American television history. Not as political statement and not as sentimentalized nobility, as the actual texture of people's lives. Economic class in The Simpsons is not primarily about money. It is about what money does to attention, aspiration, the geography of daily life, the relationship to time, the available options at every decision point, and the accumulation of all these small constraints into something that shapes a person as completely as their genetics or their psychology. The show understood that class is not an external fact about a person. It is an internal condition that structures how they perceive the world and what they perceive as possible within it. Homer's class position, solidly working class, at the precarious lower end of it, is not background information. It is the organizing condition of his entire life. His relationship to his job, his relationship to his house, his relationship to his children's futures, his relationship to time itself. The working class relationship to time is one that few discussions of The Simpsons fully engage with, but the show depicts it consistently and accurately. Time, for someone at Homer's income level, is not a resource to be invested in self-improvement or skill development or the cultivation of social capital that pays off in future economic mobility. Time, after the mandatory hours of employment, is recovery. It is repair. The beer and the television and the couch are not cultural failures. They are the minimum viable maintenance of a person who has spent the mandatory hours being depleted. The show also depicted, with unusual accuracy, the class-shaped relationship to aspiration. Homer does not have the aspiration problem that middle-class narratives tend to assign to working-class characters, the problem of not wanting to improve their situation, of lacking ambition. Homer has genuine desires. He has things he loves and things he wants to do, and a clear sense of his own pleasures and values. What he lacks is not aspiration, but the structural conditions that would make acting on aspiration more feasible than it currently is. The difference between having desires and having the material conditions to pursue them is a class condition, not a character defect. The show understood this distinction and depicted it consistently. The show also engaged with the class anxiety that sits beneath the surface of the Simpson family's daily life. The fear, not quite conscious and not quite suppressible, that the floor could give way. That one medical emergency or one job loss or one major household failure could transform their current state of barely making it into something worse. This fear is the background radiation of Homer's daily life, present in every financial decision he makes. In every moment Marge recalculates the household arithmetic, in the specific way Homer's relationship to his job is shaped by the knowledge that the job, terrible as it is the barrier between the family's current circumstances and the circumstances below them. This fear is the great unacknowledged driver of the American working class experience, and American television almost universally failed to depict it until The Simpsons made it a structural feature of its main character's psychology. Homer is afraid, underneath everything else. Not in any way he can fully articulate or consciously address. In the deep, biological way of someone whose earliest memories were shaped by economic insecurity and who has never been far enough above that insecurity to stop responding to it. The class consciousness the show developed across 36 seasons is not the class consciousness of resentment, which is how American entertainment usually handles the subject when it handles it at all. It is the class consciousness of clear, seeing the capacity to look at the actual conditions of a life and understand what those conditions are producing, without pretending the conditions are different than they are, and without pretending the people living within them are diminished by doing so. The Simpsons saw the working class clearly, without condescension and without sentimentality, and found in it the full range of human experience. Love and frustration and joy and fear and failure and resilience, and the specific kind of dignity that exists outside the categories that the economy uses to measure people's worth. That is what the show gave to the people who recognized themselves in it, not a mirror of their nobility, a mirror of their reality, held with enough care and enough humor that looking into it was something other than painful. A show that saw what their lives were and found them worth 36 years of sustained attention. Section 21. Maggie Simpson, the most powerful person on Evergreen Terrace. Maggie Simpson doesn't talk. She doesn't walk reliably. She communicates primarily through pacifier noises and the occasional pointed stare. She is 1 year old. She has been 1 year old for 36 years. And in that time, without saying a word, she has accomplished more than every other member of her family combined. She shot a billionaire. She led a daycare rebellion against a tyrannical caretaker. She saved her family from multiple life-threatening situations. She demonstrated problem-solving abilities that exceed those of adults 3 times her age. She was tested and found to possess intelligence that should not exist in a child who has not yet learned to form sentences. And through all of it, every remarkable thing she has ever done, she maintains her silence. Not because she cannot speak, because she chooses not to. Let us start with the shooting, because it is the act that defines her in the public consciousness, though it is actually the least interesting thing about her. When the official investigation concluded that baby Maggie Simpson shot Mr. Burns, Chief Wiggum offered the definitive institutional response. No jury in the world would convict a baby, and that was the end of it. But look at the final shot of that episode one more time. Everyone has left the room. Maggie is alone. She looks around carefully, deliberately, confirming that nobody is watching. Then she moves her pacifier in a motion that mimics pulling a trigger. That is not reflexive behavior. That is not a baby randomly moving her mouth. That is a 1-year-old demonstrating awareness of what happened, awareness that the act had significance, and awareness that performing this gesture in front of others would have consequences. She waited until she was alone. She checked her surroundings. Then she reenacted the shooting in private. That sequence of actions requires situational awareness, memory, caution, and impulse control. These are not traits associated with infants. These are traits associated with someone who understands exactly what they are doing and has decided that secrecy is the optimal strategy. The Longest Daycare is a theatrical short film released in 2012, nominated for an Academy Award, and 7 minutes of Maggie demonstrating intelligence that would be remarkable in an adult. The premise? Maggie is dropped off at a daycare center run with authoritarian efficiency. She encounters a caterpillar about to become a butterfly. Another baby, a bully, wants to destroy it. What follows is Maggie outmaneuvering the bully, the staff, and the facility's security systems to save the butterfly and release it into the wild. She does this without speaking a word, through observation, planning, improvisation, and the kind of adaptive problem-solving that most adults struggle with. She reads the environment. She identifies threats. She develops strategies on the fly. She executes multi-step plans that require timing, spatial awareness, and the ability to predict other people's behavior. And she does all of this while physically limited to the motor skills of a 1-year-old. Her body can barely keep up with her mind. But her decision-making is flawless. The show has tested Maggie's intelligence directly. The results vary by episode, but the implication is consistent. Maggie is not a normal baby. In certain episodes, her intelligence registers as extraordinary off the charts, beyond what standardized testing can measure. The show plays this for quick jokes and moves on. But the pattern is unmistakable. Maggie's defining characteristic is not her intelligence. It is her silence. Her first word, Daddy, was voiced by Elizabeth Taylor in what amounted to a cameo. It happened once and was never repeated. Maggie has gone 36 years without developing language in any meaningful way. She is surrounded by a family of extremely verbal people. Homer never stops talking. Marge never stops worrying aloud. Bart never stops provoking. Lisa never stops lecturing. The Simpson household is a wall of constant noise, and in the middle of it, Maggie sits in silence, watching, listening, processing. Look at what happens to the intelligent women in this family. Lisa is brilliant. Lisa has an IQ that dwarfs everyone in her household and most adults in Springfield. And what has that intelligence gotten her? Isolation, mockery, dismissal. Lisa speaks up and gets ignored. Lisa challenges authority and gets punished. Lisa tries to improve the world around her and gets crushed by the weight of a community that does not want to be improved. Maggie watched this happen. Maggie has been watching this happen since the day she was born. She watched her sister fight every day for recognition and receive nothing but resistance. She watched the smartest person in the family be consistently overlooked and undervalued by a household and a community that rewards stupidity and punishes insight. And Maggie learned not the lesson Lisa learned, which is to keep fighting regardless of the cost. Maggie learned the opposite lesson. Silence is power. Invisibility is armor. The less they notice you, the more you can accomplish. Think about it. Every time Maggie does something remarkable, what happens? The family does not notice. The community does not notice. Burns was shot, and the investigation focused on everyone except the baby because who suspects a baby? The daycare rebellion succeeded because nobody monitors infants closely enough to see them organizing. Every heroic act, every display of intelligence, every moment where Maggie saves the day, it happens below the radar, in the margins, in the spaces where nobody is paying attention. And Maggie has ensured that nobody pays attention to her by maintaining the most effective disguise possible. She pretends to be exactly what everyone expects a baby to be: quiet, passive, helpless, dependent. She is none of those things. She is the opposite of all of them. She is the most capable member of the Simpson family. She has spent 36 years making sure nobody figures that out. And maybe that is the scariest thing about Maggie. Not what she has done. What she is waiting to do. Behind that pacifier, behind those enormous eyes, behind 36 years of deliberate silence, something is thinking. Something is planning. Something is watching the family and the town and the world with an intelligence that nobody suspects and nobody can contain. And when Maggie finally decides to act, when she finally breaks her silence and reveals what she has been carrying behind that blank baby stare, Springfield will not see it coming. Nobody will. Because that is exactly how Maggie designed it. Section 22. The accumulation of small things. The Simpsons has no season-long narrative arcs in the traditional sense. Episodes are largely self-contained. The events of one episode rarely carry into the next, with continuity the plot depends on. Characters do not develop in the linear way that prestige television trained audiences to expect. Homer does not become wiser. Bart does not mature. Lisa does not find the intellectual peer she needs. The show resets, season after season, returning the Simpsons to their positions on the couch, to their stations in the school and the plant and the kitchen, to the specific coordinates of their lives, as they exist in the perpetual present of the floating timeline. And yet the show accumulates emotional weight across its run in a way that feels, to the audience that has been watching since the beginning, like something approaching the weight of a life. This is one of the most unusual things about it as a narrative object. It has the surface structure of a reset. Nothing carries, nothing persists. The consequences of each episode dissolve by the next, and the deep structure of an accumulation. You feel more watching an episode from the 25th season than you feel watching the same episode without the context of the 24 that came before it. The weight builds. It just does not build through conventional narrative continuity. The mechanism is emotional residue. Every time the show does something true, every time it shows you Homer's love for his family in a moment that cuts through all the comedy, every time it lets Marge's exhaustion be briefly visible, every time Lisa plays the saxophone alone and the show holds the image long enough for you to feel what it means, it deposits something in the viewer's emotional understanding of these characters. Not an event that the plot will reference. Not a development that changes who the character is going forward. Just a moment of genuine feeling, deposited and left there. Over 36 seasons, those deposits accumulate. They build a relationship between the audience and the characters that is different from what conventional narrative produces. Not based on what happens to the characters, based on what the characters are, what they have always been. What the show keeps returning to and showing you in different lights across different contexts, as though the show understands that the truth of a person is not captured in any single moment but in the accumulation of moments, each one partial, each one adding something to the picture. This is actually closer to how we come to know real people than how we know fictional characters. We do not know the people we love through their narrative arcs. We know them through accumulation, through the repeated small observations. The moments that revealed something, the patterns that became recognizable over years. The Simpsons generates this kind of knowledge about its characters because it has had enough time to accumulate enough moments that the picture it builds feels genuinely complete in a way that characters in conventional narrative structures rarely achieve. Homer is the clearest example. Early Homer, Season 1 Homer, is a recognizable character but a thin one, the dim-witted father, the good-hearted fool. The Homer who exists after 36 seasons of accumulated moments is something else. He is a person the audience knows the way they know people they have been close to for decades. His capacities and his limitations are understood in their specific texture. His relationship to joy and fear and love and loss has been observed across enough different situations and enough different emotional registers that it feels complete. The method also explains why the show's emotional moments hit differently for longtime viewers than for people encountering it fresh. The scenes are not designed to land on first encounter. They are designed to land for people who have been watching long enough that the characters are real to them in the specific way the accumulative method builds reality. The scene where Homer sits beside his dying mother, holding her hand, is devastating not because of what happens in the scene itself. It is devastating because of everything the show has built around the question of Homer and his mother across every season that preceded it. The scene is the interest on an emotional investment the show has been accumulating for decades. The accumulative method is also how the satirical argument works. No individual joke about Homer's wages constitutes an argument. No individual joke about the school's textbooks constitutes an argument. No individual joke about Quimby's relationship to governance constitutes an argument. But the accumulation of all of these jokes across seasons and decades builds something that functions like an argument even though no individual joke was designed to make one. The picture that emerges from 36 years of specific, accurate, repeated observations about the conditions of American working-class life is more complete and more persuasive than any single episode or any explicit political statement the show might have made. This is the deepest thing the show has done, and it is the thing that requires the most time to appreciate. The Simpsons is not a satirical show the way a 2-hour documentary is a documentary. It is a satirical show the way a life spent paying careful attention to the world is a form of understanding. The conclusions are implicit in the accumulated observations. The argument is made by the weight of the evidence, not by the form of any single statement. 36 years of noticing specific true things about American life, depositing them as jokes, and trusting the accumulation to do the work of the argument. That is what the show has done. That is what it keeps doing. Section 23. Everything the show noticed in passing. 36 seasons and nearly 800 episodes contain more truth than any structured argument can fully catalog. Some of it comes in passing a joke in an episode about something else entirely, a line in a scene organized around a different purpose, a background visual you only catch if you are specifically looking for it. This section is for those moments, the smaller truths that did not fit the larger categories but deserve to be said. The show told the truth about addiction in ways that most family entertainment either avoids or handles badly. Barney Gumble is Homer's oldest friend and the show's most sustained portrait of what alcoholism actually looks like over time, not the dramatic version, with intervention episodes and rock-bottom moments and triumphant recoveries, but the ordinary version. A person who was bright and capable and had real possibilities in front of them arrives, through a series of small decisions and accumulated circumstances, at a life organized almost entirely around a single addiction. Barney had potential. The show makes this explicit. He was a gifted individual whose relationship with alcohol began at Homer's high school graduation party and simply never ended. The comedy surrounding Barney is never entirely comfortable because the truth underneath it is not comfortable. That addiction can take someone with genuine possibilities and turn them into a figure their former self would not recognize. That this happens in ordinary ways, without dramatic catalysts, in the lives of people nobody would have singled out as specially at risk. The show depicts the outcome honestly without depicting it as inevitable or as something the person deserved. Barney made choices. The choices accumulated. The show never stopped seeing him as a person. The show told the truth about suburban social life, about the specific American form of the single-family home neighborhood, with its careful maintenance of private space and its fragile social fabric of surface-level neighborliness that rarely goes deeper. Springfield's neighborhood dynamics are the dynamics of suburbs everywhere. The gossip, the social comparison, the anxiety about how your property looks relative to your neighbors, the sense that community exists as a performance of community rather than as an actual condition of shared life. Marge's relationships with the other women of Springfield are the relationships of people who are proximate rather than genuinely close, who share physical space and social context without the kind of sustained intimacy that proximity alone cannot produce. The show told the truth about fame and the specific American phenomenon of parasocial relationships, the one-sided intimacy that audiences develop with performers who do not know they exist. Springfield's relationship to its famous visitors is the relationship of a population for whom celebrity is the highest available form of significance. When a celebrity comes to Springfield, the town mobilizes with an excitement that exceeds what it produces for almost any civic event. The excitement is not about the person. It is about the significance that proximity to the person temporarily confers. Being near a famous person is the closest Springfield can get to being famous itself, and the town reaches for it with the hunger of people for whom the channels of actual significance are mostly closed. The show told the truth about masculinity, about the specific version of American manhood that Homer embodies, with all its failures and genuine qualities mixed together. Homer is not a role model. He is not a cautionary tale. He is a specific kind of man, emotionally open in ways the culture around him does not quite have room for, loving in a way his own vocabulary cannot fully express, failing in ways that are structural as well as personal, persisting in ways that are both admirable and somewhat heartbreaking. The show's treatment of Homer's masculinity is one of its most underappreciated achievements, a sustained depiction of what it looks like to be a certain kind of man in a certain kind of America, without the simple valence of either celebration or critique. The show told the truth about friendship, the specific kind of adult friendship that Moe's Tavern contains. The friendships between Homer and Barney and Lenny and Carl are not the friendships of the aspiring classes, built around shared professional interests and social advancement. They are the friendships of people in the same situation who do not have to explain it to each other. The friendships of the regular Thursday at the same bar, the same stools, the same complaints about the same jobs, the same laughs at the same things. These friendships are not glamorous, and the show never glamorizes them. They are real in the specific way that shared circumstances create real bonds. The show told the truth about the American relationship to nostalgia to the past that people who find the present disappointing tend to construct as a compensating fantasy. Springfield is full of nostalgic investments in better times that may not have existed as remembered. The characters return repeatedly to memories of golden ages, better neighborhoods, better jobs, better social conditions that the show subtly reveals to have been more complicated than the nostalgic version requires. The past was also constrained. The past also had its failures and its disappointed hopes. The show does not deny the genuine losses that nostalgia is responding to. It simply declines to grant the past the unreserved superiority that nostalgia needs it to have. The show told the truth about expertise and the American relationship to it, through Dr. Hibbert's medical pronouncements occasionally shaped by financial considerations, through scientists and professionals who appear in the show's world and whose expert judgment is routinely overridden by the opinions of non-experts who feel more confident than the evidence warrants. This is not a conspiracy about expertise. It is an accurate observation about how expertise functions in communities where trust in institutions has eroded and where the gap between what experts say and what powerful people want to hear creates consistent pressure on expert judgment. The show told the truth about local governance in ways that anyone who has attended a city council meeting or a planning commission hearing will recognize with the specific discomfort of seeing their own experience given a punchline. These are the rooms where the decisions that most directly shape daily life are made, by people most residents cannot name, through processes most residents cannot follow. The people who show up consistently to those rooms are systematically not representative of the people whose lives the decisions affect. They are the people with time, knowledge, and resources to participate, which means they are the people whose interests are already better represented. The council serves those present. The outcomes follow accordingly. The show told the truth about what standardized assessment actually does in schools without the resources to act meaningfully on what it finds. It does not primarily identify potential. It primarily assigns category. It sorts children by the metrics of compliance and standardized performance into tracks that will statistically shape the scope of their adult lives. And it does this before the children being sorted have had the experiences that might tell them what they are actually capable of. These are the truths in the margins, the ones delivered without building arguments around them through jokes that appeared to be about something else. They are part of the same 36-year project of observation and honest depiction. The show saw everything. It chose carefully what to develop into sustained argument and what to leave as passing observation. But it saw it all. And the cumulative effect of all of it, the central arguments and the marginal observations, and the passing jokes that contained more than they appeared to contain, is the most complete portrait of American life that the medium of television has produced. Not the most flattering portrait, the most complete one. Section 24. Why comedy is the right tool for all of this. Here is the thing about comedy that drama and documentary cannot do. Comedy operates by creating a gap between expectation and reality and then collapsing that gap in an unexpected direction. The collapse is the joke. The laugh is the body's response to the sudden resolution of the tension the gap created. What makes a great joke different from a merely competent one is the degree to which the collapse reveals something true. The degree to which the unexpected direction turns out to be the most accurate one, the one that describes the situation exactly, the one you had not quite found on your own. The Simpsons, at its best, operates at this intersection consistently. The jokes are not just funny, they are funny because they are accurate. The accuracy and the comedy are the same move. The laugh is the laugh of recognition, the laugh of being shown something true about the world you already live in, from an angle you had not found yourself. This is different from what tragedy does with truth. Tragedy shows you truth and asks you to grieve it. Documentary shows you truth and asks you to be informed by it or move to action. Persuasion shows you truth and asks you to be convinced. Comedy shows you truth and asks nothing. It just shows you, from the unexpected direction, and the laugh is the only required response. And the laugh contains all of the grief and the information and the conviction that the other forms ask for explicitly, compressed into a single, involuntary physical response that bypasses the mind's usual filtering. This is why comedy is the right tool for the subjects the Simpsons chose to address. The working class, and the education system, and the long marriage, and the media, and the faith, and the wealth, and the parenthood, and the democracy, and the environment. These are not subjects most people want to sit with directly. The defenses go up, the discomfort activates. The reasoning runs that looking at these things clearly is political, or heavy, or something they were not in the mood for. Comedy gets through those defenses because it does not announce its intentions. The joke happens before you have decided whether you want to receive the truth it contains. The laugh happens before you have decided whether you want to feel the recognition it produces. By the time you have registered what the joke was actually saying, the information has already landed. The defense was too slow. The comedy was faster. This is the method Jonathan Swift used in 1729, and Mark Twain used through his career, and the writers of The Simpsons have used since 1989. The method works because it has always worked. Human psychology has responded to truth wrapped in comedy in ways it does not respond to truth delivered directly. The Simpsons understood this, built a show around it, and ran that show for 36 years with enough skill and enough care and enough love for the people it was depicting that the result is something genuinely rare. A show that told the truth about American life, consistently and specifically, and for an impossibly long time, in a way that made people laugh first. That kept the defenses down long enough for the observation to land. That trusted its audience to carry what they received, in the form of the laugh that delivered it, across the years and the seasons and the episodes, until the accumulation became something more than any individual joke had been. The method is simple. The show is not. The truth inside the jokes is never simple. But the laugh is immediate, and the laugh comes first. And by the time you understand what you were laughing at, the truth is already inside you. That is what the show has been doing since 1989. That is what it will keep doing. The loop continues. The clouds part. Springfield is there. Section 25. Why can't we let them go? We have spent a long time in Springfield now. We have walked through the nuclear plant and the school and the marriage and the church and City Hall and the grocery store where Homer shops without checking the prices and the couch where the family keeps returning. We have followed the thread of the show's argument about American life through every subject it chose to address, through every truth it wrapped in every joke, across 36 seasons and nearly 800 episodes. And at the end of all of it, the question that sits underneath every other question is the simplest one. Why can't we let them go? Why does this specific family in this specific impossible town, generated by this specific animated show that has been on the air longer than most of its current viewers have been alive, why does it hold us the way it holds us? Why do people who have not watched the show in 10 years still feel something when the opening notes of the theme play? Why do people who grew up watching it describe specific episodes with the emotional specificity they would use to describe actual memories? The answer the show suggests through the coma theory, through the floating timeline, through the couch gag, through the 36 years of the same family returning to the same place, is not about the show's quality, though it has been a quality show across much of its run. It is about what the show has become through time. The Simpsons is not primarily a television show anymore. It is a shared cultural memory that a significant portion of the English-speaking world holds in common, accumulated across decades of watching the same family do their version of the same things in the same impossible town. The memory is not of specific episodes, though specific episodes live in it. The memory is of the experience of watching, of being in the specific state of watching The Simpsons, which has its own texture and its own warmth and its own particular quality of feeling. For people who were children when the show began, it is bound up with the experience of being young in a specific era, watching with parents, understanding jokes they were not quite old enough to understand, and feeling the pleasure of understanding them anyway. For people who came to the show later, it is bound up with discovery working back through seasons, finding episodes that land with the force of things that were made for you even though they were made before you knew you needed them. The show is also, and this is the dimension that is hardest to discuss, genuinely about the thing that keeps us watching. It is about the love inside constrained circumstances, about the way people build full lives within conditions that are not equal to their possibilities, about the persistence of warmth and humor and genuine connection in a world that keeps providing reasons to be bitter and withdrawn. The Simpsons are not admirable. They are not aspirational. They are not the model of anything. They are recognizable. They are the family that is doing what you are doing, making it work, getting through, finding pleasure in small things, loving the people immediately available to be loved, failing continuously and returning continuously in a town that is doing what your town is doing, organized around the same economic and political and institutional dynamics. The show found this recognizable and found it worth 36 years of sustained attention. It found Homer's life constrained and unglamorous and often humiliating worth depicting with genuine affection. It found Marge's life largely invisible and largely undervalued worth depicting with genuine respect. It found Springfield corrupt and polluted and collectively complicit in its own dysfunction worth depicting, with enough love to make the dysfunction funny rather than simply depressing. That is the final truth the show told through jokes. Not any of the specific truths we walked through in the sections before this. The truth about what truth-telling through comedy is for. It is for making the unbearable bearable, for looking at the actual conditions of people's lives, the constraints and the failures and the systems organized to work against them, and finding in those conditions not justification for despair, but material for laughter. Not because laughter resolves the conditions or makes them acceptable, because laughter is the oldest and most reliable human method for remaining present in conditions that would otherwise be too heavy to stay in. We cannot let them go because they are us. Not in the aspirational sense that family entertainment usually deploys when it makes that claim. In the actual sense. The messy, imperfect, constrained, loving, frequently failing, impossibly resilient sense. They are the version of us that the culture usually declines to show, the version that is not winning, not optimizing, not achieving the outcomes that the mythology says hard work should produce. The version that keeps going anyway. The version that loves what it has. The version that sits on the couch on Sunday night and watches whatever is on and does it again on Monday morning. 36 years. Nearly 800 episodes. The longest-running animated series, the longest-running sitcom, the longest-running scripted primetime show in the history of American television. And the best reason it is still running, after all of that, is the simplest one. The family is still in the house. The couch is still there, the beer is still cold, and nobody has had to say goodbye yet. Homer is already on his way home. He always finds his way home. Because in Springfield, whether it is real or dreamed or something stranger than either, the loop continues. The truth keeps riding inside the jokes to wherever it needs to go. And the show keeps telling you things you did not know you were ready to hear, in the only way they have ever arrived. Through a laugh, first, then the truth, second. Already inside you before you knew to let it in. That is the whole art. That is the entire method. 36 years of it, still running. Thank you for being here for all of this. Whatever time it is where you are watching from, wherever in the world you are right now, that is exactly the right time and the right place to be spending a few hours in Springfield. If this kept you company tonight, subscribe. There is more where this came from, and it will be here whenever you need it. See you in Springfield. Extended section. Deep dives going further into every truth the show told. On Homer and work. The details the show got right. The show depicted Homer's working life with a granularity that most employment-based comedy avoids entirely. It is not just that Homer has a bad job. It is the specific texture of how that bad job structures his relationship to everything else. Consider how Homer talks about work. He does not talk about it much. This is part of it. The working life of someone in Homer's position does not generate the kind of conversational material that employment in more socially elevated positions generates. Nobody asks Homer about interesting challenges at the plant. Nobody asks what project he is excited about. The questions that people ask each other at dinner parties, questions that assume work is a site of identity and interesting activity, do not apply to Homer. His work is something he endures between Sunday evenings and Friday afternoons, a mandatory condition of the life he actually cares about rather than a component of it. The show never makes this explicit. It just depicts it consistently. Homer's identity is not his job. His identity is his family, his friends, his appetites, his very specific and genuine enthusiasms. The plant is the absence of those things for 40 hours a week. The comedy of Homer at work is always the comedy of Homer out of place, a person whose actual self is elsewhere, operating on autopilot in a location that has nothing to do with who he is. This is an extremely common experience that almost no entertainment depicts. The experience of work as something you do rather than something you are. The experience of spending 40 hours a week in a space that does not know who you are and does not particularly want to. The experience of clocking out and becoming yourself again. Homer's Friday evening energy, the specificity of the joy of leaving, is the show's most honest image of the working week, not the weekend as leisure. The commute home as return. The show also got right the specific social dynamics of a workplace organized around extreme power differential. Homer's relationships with his co-workers Lenny and Carl primarily are the genuine, warm, relatively uncomplicated relationships of people who share a situation and do not need to compete within it because none of them have any real chance of advancing. The competition is absent. The pretense is absent. What is left is actual mutual regard and actual shared humor. The friendships at the plant are more genuine than most of Homer's social relationships in Springfield, precisely because they exist in a context with nothing to perform toward. His relationship with Burns is the opposite. Homer cannot maintain a genuine self in front of Burns because Burns's opinion of him is connected to whether Homer keeps his job, and whether Homer keeps his job is connected to whether his family retains healthcare coverage. The relationship is structured by stakes that make authenticity impossible. Homer performs, he performs the grateful, slightly stupid, eager to please employee because that is the performance the stakes require. The performance is exhausting, and Homer is not always aware he is performing, which is perhaps the most accurate detail of all. The management by fear dynamic that the show depicts in Homer's relationship with Burns is not drawn from villainous fantasy. It is drawn from the actual psychology of workplaces organized around extreme power differentials. When the cost of displeasing your employer is the loss of your family's health care, you do not have the psychological resources to maintain authentic selfhood in that relationship. You perform the required performance. You hope the performance is sufficient. You go home and try to remember who you are. Homer goes home every evening and the show treats the homecoming as the resolution. The plant is the inciting condition. The family is the resolution. Every episode, regardless of what happened in between, resolves with the family intact, with Homer home, with the specific warmth of the house on Evergreen Terrace receiving him back. This is the show's deepest argument about the working life. Not that the work is meaningless, though it often is. Not that the conditions are unjust, though they often are. The argument is about what remains when the work is subtracted, what the work is working for. Homer's work is working for the thing that receives him when the work is done. The family, the house, the Friday evening beer, the specific version of himself that the plant cannot reach. The show protected that version of Homer across 36 seasons. It protected it through every joke about his incompetence, every callback to his failures, every comedic indignity the plant inflicted on him. The Homer who comes home is intact in a way the Homer who goes to work is not. And that intactness, that specific, durable, stupid, loving completeness that Homer carries back through the door every evening is what the show was always most interested in. On Marge, the interior life of the person nobody asks about. The camera follows Homer. This is the technical fact of the show's construction. Homer is the protagonist, the POV character, the organizing center around which each episode's plot arranges itself. Marge is in most of those episodes. She is almost never the subject of them. This is partly a reflection of the show's intentional focus on Homer as the audience surrogate. It is also a formal choice that the show uses to make an argument, because Marge's interior life, which the show accesses occasionally, in episodes specifically built around giving her the focus, and in the corners of episodes built around everyone else, is where the show does some of its most honest work. Marge has opinions. Strong ones. The show grants her intelligence and aesthetic sensibility and genuine moral seriousness that are frequently subordinated to the demands of her domestic role. She has a painter's eye. She has entrepreneurial capability that several episodes demonstrate convincingly. She has political instincts and social observations that are more sophisticated than most of what Springfield produces in formal civic contexts. She is, by any reasonable measure, the most competent person in the Simpson household. None of this is the subject of most episodes. Most episodes are about what Homer is doing and how Marge responds to it. Marge's competence is the background condition that makes Homer's antics narratively possible. If Marge were not managing the household, Homer's disasters would not be survivable. If Marge were not providing the emotional stability that holds the family together, the family would not hold. Her work is the infrastructure on which the show runs. Like all infrastructure, it is most visible when it fails. The episodes that give Marge the focus, and there are enough of them, distributed across the seasons, to constitute a sustained portrait of a specific interior life, show you someone whose possibilities were constrained not by lack of ability, but by the specific form that her choices and circumstances took. She is not trapped in the dramatic sense. She chose this. She keeps choosing it. But the show never pretends that choosing something means the unchosen options disappear. Marge contains the painter and the entrepreneur and the civic activist alongside the wife and the mother, and all of those versions of herself are real, and most of them only get to exist in the margins of episodes about something else. This is the specific experience of enormous numbers of women across the demographic that Marge represents. The intelligent, capable person whose capabilities have been organized primarily around the maintenance of a family and a household, whose interior life is rich, and whose exterior circumstances do not fully reflect that richness, who loves what she has chosen and also, sometimes, feels the weight of the unchosen. The show depicted this without dramatizing it, without making it the subject of a speech or a revelation or a moment of resolution. It just showed Marge at the kitchen window, or in the audience at one of Bart's school events, or at the end of a long day sitting in the specific stillness of someone who has been on since morning and is now, briefly, allowed to stop. And in those moments, it let you see what was there, which was everything. An entire interior life, running quietly, mostly unobserved, providing the foundation for everyone else's more visible existence. The show never resolved this or fixed it or gave Marge the moment where everything she is gets properly recognized. Because that is not what happens. The recognition does not arrive on schedule. The interior life keeps running. The family keeps being what the family is. And Marge keeps choosing it, every morning, with the specific fullness of someone who knows exactly what they are choosing and chooses it anyway. That is the truth the show told about Marge. Not that her life is inadequate, that her life is complete and her interior life is richer than the exterior of it suggests. And that the gap between those two things, the richness of what she is and the narrowness of where that richness is allowed to go, is a real thing that real women carry, quietly, in the spaces between the tasks that the household requires. The show saw it. It did not fix it. It just made sure you knew it was there. On Burns, the system that made him possible. Every discussion of Burns eventually arrives at the question of whether he is realistic. Whether a person can actually be this comprehensively terrible, this precisely organized around the extraction of value from everyone around him, this insulated from the consequences of what he does, the answer is yes. The answer is that Burns is not a fantasy villain. He is an extrapolation, a character built by taking the actual logic of accumulated industrial wealth and following it to its endpoint, without the social moderating forces that usually prevent any individual from embodying the logic quite this completely. The social moderating forces are real. Most enormously wealthy people are not Burns. They have families, genuine friendships, philanthropic impulses, reputational concerns that require them to maintain some visible relationship to the well-being of the communities their enterprises affect. These moderating forces are not purely cynical, they are genuine in many cases, and they produce real goods, but they are also contingent. They depend on the specific personality of the specific wealthy person and on the specific social context in which that wealth operates. What Burns represents is the logic of accumulation and extraction divorced from those contingent moderating forces, the pure form of the thing. The version that exists when the wealth is old enough and established enough, and the holder remote enough from the actual conditions of the people affected by his enterprises, that the moderating forces have been fully attenuated. Burns is not Burns because he is evil as a personality. He is Burns because the system that produced him rewards exactly what he does and provides no mechanism for sanctioning it. The plant generates profit by externalizing its costs onto the environment, onto the health of the surrounding population, onto the regulatory agencies it captures, onto the political system it funds. The profit is private, the costs are public. This is the standard operating model of industrial extraction. Burns is the face of the model. The model is not fictional. Springfield is the community that lives with the consequences of the model, and the show has been depicting those consequences since the first episode, not as a crisis, not as a dramatic environmental collapse, as the background condition of everything. The contamination that is always present, the health costs that are always there, the political arrangements that are always organized around maintaining the plant's operation, the collective denial that is always running, doing the work of making the intolerable tolerable one episode at a time. Burns won. He always wins. And the show is honest about this not because it is pessimistic, but because honesty requires acknowledging that the systems producing the Burns outcomes are not exceptional or temporary. They are the standard operating conditions of a certain kind of economy, in a certain kind of political environment, in a certain kind of community organized around the employment and energy supply that one man controls. Springfield is that community. The show has been depicting what it means to live in that community for 36 years. The jokes are how it kept you in the room for all 36 of them. On Lisa and the world that was not built for her, there is a specific kind of loneliness that belongs to people who can see things clearly in communities that have organized themselves around not seeing. It is not the loneliness of being disliked, or of being excluded, or of the obvious social rejection that entertainment usually depicts as the difficult experience. It is quieter and more durable than any of those. It is the loneliness of being present and not received, of saying true things into rooms that process those things as noise. Lisa has been living in this loneliness for 36 seasons. The show is careful not to sentimentalize this. Lisa is not a tragic figure. She has genuine pleasures and genuine relationships and moments of real joy and real connection. The saxophone is not a symbol of her suffering. It is an expression of her actual self, the self that the social conditions around her cannot reach or diminish. The show gives Lisa the saxophone as a way of saying, this part of her is intact. Regardless of what Springfield does or does not do with her intelligence and her values, this specific expression of who she is exists in a space where the surrounding conditions cannot touch it. But the loneliness is still real, and the show does not pretend otherwise. What the show does, which is more honest than either sentimentalizing or dismissing the loneliness, is show you its specific mechanism. The loneliness is not about intelligence per se. It is about the gap between what Lisa can perceive and what the institutions and relationships around her can acknowledge. She can see the contamination. She can see the political dysfunction. She can see the economic conditions that constrain her family's life. She can articulate all of these things clearly, with evidence, in language that is accurate and precise. And the town processes this as Lisa being difficult, as Lisa needing to relax, as Lisa not understanding that this is just how things are around here. That gap between accurate perception and institutional acknowledgement is the mechanism of her loneliness. It is also the mechanism that the show is most consistently depicting across all 36 seasons in every character's storyline, not just Lisa's. Homer perceives the injustice of his working conditions but lacks the cognitive resources to act on the perception. Marge perceives the constraints of her domestic role but lacks the structural conditions to change them. Ned perceives the suffering that his conditioning prevents him from adequately expressing. The gap between what is perceived and what can be acknowledged or addressed is the condition of life in Springfield. Lisa just perceives it most clearly and feels the gap most acutely. The flash forward in which Lisa becomes the first female president of the United States is the show's most explicit statement about what Lisa's capabilities, fully expressed in a context that allows them, could produce. The episode is careful to be honest about what that context would cost. She gets there alone, essentially, having made the choices that the capabilities required and paid the social cost that those choices produced. The life is not uncomplicated. The achievement is real. The show gives her the future that her intelligence and her values deserve, and then closes the window on it and puts her back at 8 years old in Springfield, which is the honest ending. The future is possible. The present is what it is. The gap between them is where she lives. Lisa keeps going anyway. Not because the calculation changes, not because she has been promised that her efforts will produce proportional outcomes, because she has decided that the alternative accepting the terms that Springfield offers, becoming comfortable with the gaps, treating the collective denial as her own, is worse than the loneliness. She would rather be right and lonely than comfortable and complicit. The show has been honoring that decision for 36 years, not by rewarding it, by seeing it clearly. That is what honor actually looks like when you strip the sentimentality away from it. Someone makes a hard choice. You see the choice clearly. You do not pretend it does not cost what it costs. You do not pretend the cost is not worth paying. You just see it. The show sees Lisa. That is the whole of what it gives her. And for someone who has been spending her entire life being looked at without being seen, it is not nothing. On the long marriage. What Marge and Homer know about each other. 20 years into a marriage, you know things about another person that you did not know you were learning. You know the specific way they breathe when they are asleep and worried. You know the difference between their tired laugh and their actually amused laugh. You know which version of silence means they are processing something difficult and which version means they are simply present and comfortable. You know them in the accumulative way, not through any single observation, but through the layering of 1,000 small ones over years. This knowledge is not discussed. It does not come up in conversations. It is not the knowledge that people display at dinner parties or describe to friends. It is the knowledge of proximity, of continuous shared presence, of having been close enough to another person for long enough that you have absorbed their texture in ways neither of you could fully catalog. Homer and Marge know each other this way. The show depicts this knowledge occasionally, in the moments that require it, the moments where Homer does something that reveals a genuine sensitivity to what Marge needs that his usual obtuse behavior would not suggest he possesses, or where Marge responds to Homer in a way that demonstrates she knows something about him that he has never said. These moments are brief. The show does not draw attention to them or build arguments around them. They are just present, scattered through the episodes, the accumulated evidence of two people who have been paying attention to each other for a long time. This is the knowledge the show is arguing is the content of the long marriage. Not the passion of the beginning, not the shared project of building a life. Those things are present in the marriage's history, and they contribute to what it is. But the daily content, the thing the marriage is made of on a Tuesday evening when nothing is happening, is this accumulative knowledge. The knowing of another person, in the specific, private, non-transferable way that only comes from years of continuous close attention. Homer and Marge love each other. This is established and re-established across every season. But the show is more interested in something deeper than love, which is this knowledge, the specific knowing. The way Marge knows that Homer's bravado about things he does not understand is connected to the specific wounds of his childhood. The way Homer knows that Marge's patience has a floor, and the floor is real, and what is below the floor is important. The way they know each other's silences and failures and specific versions of trying and not quite managing, this is what 36 years of watching the same marriage comes to, in the end. Not a story about love conquering obstacles. A portrait of two people who know each other in the accumulative way, who keep choosing the knowing, who maintain it across all the years of difficulty and tedium and occasional genuine joy, because the knowing is the actual thing and the marriage is the condition that produced it. The show gave this to its audience without explaining it. without framing it or labeling it or slowing down to let you feel its significance. It just kept showing you the same two people in the same house over and over across 36 years until the knowing was visible in the way that the depth of a river is visible from the bank, not in any single moment, in the accumulation of all of them. On Springfield as America, the show's final and most durable argument is the one it has never stated. It has shown you instead, episode by episode, in aggregate, over 36 years. Springfield is America. Not a specific America, not the coastal America or the heartland America or the red America or the blue America or any of the partial, contested, regionally specific versions that fight about what the country actually is. All of it. The full breadth of what the country looks like from the inside, from the position of people who are not exceptional and not powerful and not the subjects of the stories the culture usually tells about itself. The corrupt politician who manages appearances. The billionaire who poisons the community he claims to serve. The population too economically dependent and too cognitively occupied with survival to mount sustained resistance. The education system that sorts children into economic categories. The media that substitutes spectacle for information. The faith that has outlasted the sincerity that built it. The long marriages that accumulate toward knowledge rather than toward resolution. The parents who love their children more than they can adequately provide for them. The democracy that runs on performance rather than accountability. The environment traded quietly for the economic arrangements that depend on its destruction. These are not Springfield's problems. These are America's problems, depicted in a fictional town on an animated show for 36 years, through jokes, through characters, through the specific accumulated weight of thousands of small, truthful observations that together constitute the most complete portrait of American life that the medium of television has produced. The show did not predict this portrait would be accurate 36 years later. It observed what was already true in 1989 and depicted it honestly, year after year, trusting that honesty would remain relevant because the conditions it was depicting were not temporary anomalies, but structural features of the country it was describing. And it was right. Every season of new episodes that lands on a world where the show's satirical targets are still in operation is evidence that the show was not describing a moment, but a condition. Springfield will never be located on a map. The conditions that make Springfield what it is are not locatable on a map either. They are everywhere. They are the air. They are the water, metaphorically and, in Springfield's case, literally. And Homer keeps going back to the plant, and Marge keeps holding the household together, and Bart keeps getting in trouble, and Lisa keeps being right, and Maggie watches everything from behind her pacifier, understanding it all, choosing carefully what to reveal. The loop continues. The jokes keep coming. The truth keeps riding inside them to wherever it needs to go. That is the whole art of it. That is what 36 seasons of The Simpsons finally adds up to. On Bart, the kid the system does not have a plan for. Bart Simpson is 10 years old. He is the second most famous animated character in the history of American television, behind his sister and ahead of his father depending on who you ask. He has been in detention for 36 years. He has failed every standardized test Springfield Elementary has administered. He has disrupted more classroom lessons than any student in the documented history of the school. He has been to the principal's office more often than Skinner himself, which is saying something because Skinner works there. And Bart is not stupid. This point cannot be overemphasized. The show makes it consistently, and the audience consistently misses it because the school's assessment of Bart, the failing grades, the detention slips, the parental notifications is presented so constantly and so emphatically that it functions as the show's own position rather than the institution's position. But the show is not the school. The show knows things about Bart that the school does not know. And what the show knows is that Bart's intelligence is real, specific, and entirely outside the range of things that schools are designed to measure. Consider what Bart is actually good at. He is a world-class reader of people. He can assess a social situation in the time it takes most adults to understand that a situation exists. He can identify what someone wants, what they fear, what they are not saying, and what move will produce the outcome he is looking for in a fraction of a second, consistently and accurately. This is not intuition, this is intelligence. a specific, practiced, high-functioning form of intelligence that the school's aptitude tests will never measure because the school's aptitude tests were designed to measure compliance and recall. He is a natural leader. When Bart organizes something, a prank, a rebellion, a neighborhood scheme, the other kids follow him not because they are afraid of him, but because he is genuinely compelling in the role. He communicates clearly. He delegates effectively. He adapts plans on the fly when circumstances change. He keeps people motivated. These are the skills that organizations spend enormous amounts of money trying to develop in adults who were never taught them. Bart has them at 10. He is a sophisticated strategic thinker. His pranks are not random acts of chaos. They are architecturally complex operations that require identifying a target, understanding the target's psychology, anticipating responses, building contingencies, and executing multiple coordinated steps under time pressure. The fact that the target is usually authority and the operation is usually mischief does not change the structural sophistication of the enterprise. The school cannot see any of this because the school is not looking for it. The school is looking for the ability to sit still and repeat information in the format the institution prefers. Bart cannot do this. The school categorizes him accordingly. And the category he gets placed in the category of the bright but directionless underachiever who will probably end up in a manual trade is the category the school has available for children whose intelligence falls. Outside the range the school is designed to value. The show makes this argument most directly in the episode where a substitute teacher arrives and connects with Bart in ways that Skinner and Krabappel cannot. The teacher sees what Bart is, sees the actual capabilities underneath the failing grades, responds to those capabilities rather than to the institutional record. And for a brief period, Bart flourishes not in a sentimental way, not in the cinematic version where the right teacher transforms a troubled kid's life, but in the specific, modest, real way of someone who is finally being seen accurately rather than misclassified. Then the substitute leaves. The regular conditions reassert themselves. Bart returns to failing. Because the conditions that produce Bart's failures are structural and Bart cannot change them by himself. The show never gives Bart the triumphant moment where his real intelligence is recognized and his life trajectory changes. That would be a lie. The structural conditions that make the school unable to see Bart clearly are not temporary. They are the design. The school is doing exactly what it is designed to do. Bart is not a malfunction of the system. He is a cost of the system, the cost of organizing mass education around compliance and standardized performance, rather than around identifying and engaging with the full range of actual human intelligence. Springfield Elementary will keep failing Bart. Bart will keep failing Springfield Elementary. And neither failure is primarily about anyone being bad at their job. On the things Homer knows that he cannot say, Homer Simpson is not as stupid as he appears. This is the show's longest-running and most carefully constructed subversion. The show's creator has stated that Homer has an IQ of 55. The show depicts him repeatedly sleeping at his workstation, failing to complete basic tasks, demonstrating a relationship with cause and effect that suggests the connection is not reliably available to him. He put a crayon in his brain as a child and kept it there for decades. The evidence for his cognitive limitation is extensive and consistent, and yet, Homer knows things, not intellectual things, not the things that IQ measures, but real things about his situation and his world that the show reveals in moments that the comedy usually moves past quickly, because the comedy requires the reveal not to land too heavily. Homer knows that Burns does not know his name. He knows this deeply, in the way that people know things that are humiliating rather than just disappointing. The show returns to this repeatedly. Burns referring to Homer as the round man, or that bald fellow, or the employee in Sector 7G, and each return produces a specific, brief expression on Homer's face that is not the blank obliviousness the character usually displays. It is something more complicated. The recognition that you are not seen, that the person with power over your survival does not consider you specific enough to learn your name. Homer knows that his children are more capable than he is in ways that will eventually carry them beyond him. The show glimpses this in moments between Homer and Lisa, especially the brief flash of something in Homer's face, when Lisa demonstrates an ability or knowledge that Homer cannot match, something that is both pride and a specific melancholy that pride does not entirely cover. He loves Lisa completely. He also knows the gap between them is real and will not close. He knows he is not the father she would have designed for herself. The show never lets him articulate this, but it shows you that he knows it. Homer knows that the life he is living is not what he might have been able to build under different conditions. He knows this in a way that is below conscious articulation. The knowledge lives in the specific quality of certain silences, in the moments where the show gives Homer a moment of quiet, and the quiet contains something that is not comfortable. He chose to put the crayon back. He chose the fog, rather than the painful clarity of being able to see his life at full resolution. That choice was rational given what he saw when the crayon was removed. But it was still a choice. And choices, even forgotten choices, leave traces. Homer knows that he loves his family more than the evidence of his daily behavior would suggest, more than he can adequately demonstrate, more than the language available to him can fully express. This knowing is the most important thing about him, and the most invisible, because it almost never surfaces in a form that the people around him can receive. It lives in the gap between what Homer does, the failures, the inattentions, the well-meaning disasters, and what Homer is, which is a person organized almost entirely around the love for the specific people he shares his life with. The show depicts this knowing without resolving it into eloquence or gesture. It just puts Homer on the couch at the end of the episode, next to Marge, with the family intact, with the ordinary warmth of ordinary people who have gotten through another day together. And in that image, every week, is everything Homer knows that he cannot say. The comedy is in what he cannot say. The truth is in the knowing. And the 36 years of watching are how you come to understand both. On the reset button, why Springfield keeps forgetting. One of the most discussed features of The Simpsons structure is the reset. Catastrophic things happen in Springfield. The town is destroyed, sealed under a dome, invaded, nearly irradiated, economically devastated, and by the next episode, everything is back to normal. Nobody references what happened last week. The slate is wiped clean. Life continues as though the events of the previous episode did not occur. Fan discourse calls this episodic storytelling. It is a feature of the format, not a bug. The show exists in a floating present where consequences do not accumulate between episodes, because each episode needs to start from the same position. This is accurate, and the show has spent 36 seasons arguing that it is also something else. The Princi Paul and the Pauper episode made this explicit. The town did not accidentally forget Armin Tamzarian's real identity. The town voted to forget it. A legal decree was issued making it illegal to remember. The forgetting was institutional, deliberate, and enforced. The reset was not a narrative convenience, it was a political act. Under this reading, every Springfield reset is a political act. The town survived being sealed under a dome. It survived burns blocking out the sun. It survived the oil spill, the nuclear near misses, the various civic catastrophes that should have permanently altered the conditions of life there, and it chose not to remember them. Not because its residents are cognitively limited, because remembering would require acting on what is remembered, and acting on what is remembered would mean confronting the structures that produce the catastrophe, and confronting those structures would mean challenging Burns, and challenging Burns would mean risking the economic dependency that the entire town's survival rests on. Springfield forgets because remembering is dangerous. Not dangerous in the immediate physical sense, dangerous in the economic sense. The danger of being the town that challenged its power plant and lost its power plant and lost its primary employer and lost the tax base that funded every municipal function. The danger of being the community that chose truth and paid for it. So Springfield forgets every episode. By unspoken collective agreement, maintained through the social mechanisms that the Tamzarian episode made visible for one unusually explicit moment. The reset is not a production convenience. The reset is Springfield performing the act of survival that its economic conditions require. And under the coma theory, the reset is something even more specific. It is Homer's dreaming brain refusing to let the story end. Each episode, the simulation runs a variation on the theme. Each episode, something threatens the family, the stability, the world that Homer's unconscious mind is generating. Each episode, the threat is resolved, and the world resets. Because Homer's dreaming brain cannot generate the outcome where the threat does not resolve, cannot generate the ending, cannot let the family be lost, cannot wake up. The reset is how the dream protects itself. How Homer's unconscious mind keeps the simulation running. Every morning the world resets to the moment before the coma, not exactly, because the dream drifts, because the neural damage accumulates, because the later seasons are stranger and more surreal as the brain deteriorates, but close enough. Close enough to the world as it was when Homer last saw it. Close enough to keep going. The reset is not a production decision. It is a survival decision, made by a town, made by a dreaming mind, made by a show that has been keeping a family alive in a loop for 36 years because the alternative is letting the loop end. On what the show leaves unsaid. The most powerful things the show has ever done are the things it has not said. It has not said that Homer loves his family more than he can express. It has shown you this through 36 years of him finding his way home. It has not said that Marge's interior life is richer than her exterior circumstances reflect. It has shown you this in the corners of episodes built around other people. It has not said that the system Burns operates is organized to prevent the people it most affects from being able to challenge it. It has shown you this through the accumulated weight of every episode where Homer tries to leave the plant and cannot. It has not said that Lisa's loneliness is the cost of a specific kind of integrity in a specific kind of community. It has shown you this through 36 years of her being right and alone. It has not said that Ned Flanders' goodness, manufactured in childhood and sustained through compulsive conditioning, is a cage he cannot open. It has shown you this through the one episode where the cage briefly came apart. It has not said that Burns' continued operation of the plant is only possible because the community's economic dependency prevents it from acting on what it knows. It has shown you this through three-eyed fish and cracked cooling towers and a dome. It has not said that the democratic institutions of Springfield are organized to produce outcomes consistent with the interests of the people who control its economy. It has shown you this through Quimby and the Bear Patrol and the city council meetings that nobody goes to. It has not said that the media in Springfield is organized around attention rather than truth. It has shown you this through Kent Brockman welcoming his insect overlords. It has not said that faith, divorced from the institutional forms organized around it, might respond to something the institutional forms cannot manufacture. It has shown you this through God talking to Homer and ignoring Ned. It has not said that the working week is an act of endurance rather than an act of meaning for enormous numbers of people, and that what those people are enduring toward the Friday evening, the family, the specific warmth of coming home is the real content of their lives rather than its interruption. It has shown you this through Homer's commute. The show never says these things directly because saying them directly would require a pause, a wait, a shift in register that would transform comedy into something else. The show has no interest in transforming into something else. It is a comedy. The comedy is not the delivery mechanism for the truth the way a pill is a delivery mechanism for medicine. The comedy is the truth. The laugh is the recognition. The recognition is the whole point. You cannot take the truth out of The Simpsons and examine it separately from the comedy because there is no separate truth. There is a joke and the thing the joke is made of, and those things are one thing, always, in every episode, across 36 seasons. That is the whole art. That is all of it. Find the thing that is both true and funny about the world you actually live in and say it in the only way that gets through. Say it through the laugh. Let the laugh carry it. Trust the audience to receive what the laugh delivers. The show has been doing this since 1989. It is still doing it. And the truth it is delivering, joke by joke and season by season, through Homer's donut and Lisa's saxophone and Ned's high diddly ho, and Marge's concerned hum, and Bart's chalk on a chalkboard, that truth is still true. It has been true this whole time. The show just kept showing up to say it. Every week, from the clouds, into Springfield, into the couch, into the loop that never quite ends. Still running, still funny, still true. Final note. On staying up late in Springfield. If you are still here, it is probably late where you are. That is the right time for this. Springfield has always been a late-night place. A place for the quiet hours when the daytime defenses come down and you can hear what things are actually saying. Homer driving home in the dark. Marge at the kitchen window after everyone else is asleep. Lisa playing her saxophone in a house where everyone can hear it and nobody quite listens. The show told the truth about American life for 36 years. It told it through jokes because that was the only way the truth was going to get through. And it got through. Season by season, episode by episode, laugh by laugh, into every person who sat on their own couch and recognized something in the yellow family on the screen. They are still there. The loop is still running. And if you need them, they will be there the next time you turn on the television, exactly where you left them, exactly as they have always been, still getting through another day in a town that should not exist and cannot be found and has been telling you the truth for 36 years? Drop a comment. Tell me what time it is where you are. Tell me what part of the world brought you here tonight. And if you want to keep coming back to Springfield, subscribe. The loop continues. There is always more to find. See you there. Additional section. The Golden Age, the Decline, and the Thing That Was Always There. There is a debate that has been running in Simpsons fandom since approximately 1997 about when the show got bad. The parameters of the debate shift depending on who is participating. Some people say it was Season 9, with the Armin Tamzarian episode. Some say Season 8, when the show first started showing signs of what critics called Flanderization, the process by which minor character traits become dominant ones, by which Homer's occasional stupidity became his defining attribute, by which the nuance started flattening into the louder version of itself. Some people are more generous and draw the line at Season 12 or 15, or insist that the show is still good, and anyone who says otherwise is simply nostalgic. The coma theory offers one answer to this debate. There is no decline. There is just the dream deteriorating as the neural damage accumulates. The earlier seasons, when Homer was closest to his last conscious moment, reflect a world more coherent and more grounded. The later seasons, further from that last moment and shaped by increasing neural degradation, become stranger and more surreal. What looks like declining quality from outside is actually the inner logic of a brain that has been asleep for decades and is showing the wear. This is a poetic answer, and also, whether or not the coma theory is literally true, a structurally accurate one, the tonal shift that happens across the seasons is real. The show's relationship to consequence and continuity does change. The characters do become flatter in certain ways, their defining traits more prominent, and their nuances less available. This is a real change, and reasonable people can find it disappointing. But here is the thing the decline discourse consistently misses. The fundamental argument the show is making never changed. The working class trap is still there in the later seasons. Homer still cannot leave the plant, still cannot afford to, still performs the same exhausted compliance in front of Burns that he performed in Season 2. The specific texture of the trap has not changed because the trap has not changed. The real-world conditions the show was always depicting have not changed either. If anything, they have gotten worse in measurable ways across the period of the show's run. Wages have stagnated longer. The employer-provided healthcare dependency has deepened. The political capture of regulatory agencies has advanced. The media ecosystem has become more organized around attention and less around information. The show did not run out of material. The show was always making the same argument, and the argument remains accurate. What changed is the style of the delivery, the coherence of the plotting, the depth of the character work. What did not change is what the show was always saying underneath all of that. And this is the most honest assessment of the show's 36-year run. The argument was always more consistent than the quality. The quality fluctuates across seasons and within seasons, and sometimes within individual episodes. The argument does not fluctuate. Season 2 Homer and Season 22 Homer have the same relationship to their job, the same economic vulnerability, the same psychological damage from the same sources, the same bottomless love for the same family. The nuance is reduced. The core is intact. Critics who focus on the decline are not wrong about what they are observing. They are wrong to treat the decline as the only meaningful thing about the later seasons. The later seasons are still The Simpsons. They are still engaged in the same project. They are still telling the truth through jokes, sometimes less skillfully than they once did, sometimes with a bluntness that the earlier seasons would have avoided, sometimes with plotting that substitutes spectacle for the quieter observations that gave the early seasons their specific weight. But the observations are still there. The truths are still riding in the jokes. The project is still ongoing. The Golden Age debate is also, in a specific way, a version of the nostalgia problem the show has always been smart enough to depict from the outside. Fans who say the show was better in the early seasons are not wrong about their preferences or their subjective experiences. But there is a version of this debate that is not really about the show at all. It is about the people watching it. The early seasons were experienced during a specific period of those people's lives. Younger, more open, encountering the show with a freshness that is, by definition, unavailable now. The show can never give that back. The show that exists now is not the show they watched then, partly because the show has changed and partly because they have changed, and the two things are not fully separable. The show knew this. The floating timeline was always also an argument about this. The Simpsons stays the same ages, same house, same town, same family dynamics, partly because that sameness mirrors what audiences want the show to be. The show they first watched, preserved in amber, available to return to whenever they need it. The show cannot be that, but it can keep pretending. It can keep maintaining the fiction that nothing has changed, that the family is still exactly as they were, that the world they inhabit is still the world. It was in the late 80s and early 90s when the show and its audience were both new to each other. The fiction is not entirely a lie. The argument the show is making has not aged. Homer's trap is Homer's trap. Marge's invisible labor is Marge's invisible labor. Lisa's loneliness in a community organized around not seeing clearly is Lisa's loneliness. The structural conditions being depicted in 1993 are the structural conditions being depicted in 2024 because the structural conditions have not fundamentally changed. The show's argument about America is still accurate. The world the show depicts is still the world the audience lives in. That is the thing that was always there, through every season and every renewal and every debate about when the show peaked and whether it should have ended years ago. The argument was always there. The truths were always inside the jokes. The project was always ongoing. The show is still running. The argument is still being made. The truths are still being delivered, season by season, joke by joke, through whatever the current season's version of Homer and Marge and Bart and Lisa and Maggie are doing this week. And Homer is still going back to the plant. Still coming home, still sitting on the couch, the loop continuing, the truth still riding inside the joke, to wherever it needs to go. That is the whole of it. That has always been the whole of it. From the first episode to whatever episode is airing right now. As you watch this, wherever you are and whatever time it is, the same project, the same method, the same family, the same impossible town, telling you the same accurate things about the actual country you actually live in, through jokes, because that is the only way any of it was ever going to get through. 36 years. Still running, still true? The loop continues. Closing section. Everything the show was always saying. We covered a lot of ground. The working class trap that Homer cannot leave. The school that sorts before it teaches. The long marriage nobody in entertainment wants to show you. The media that mistakes performance for information. The faith that has outlasted the sincerity that built it. The wealth that has insulated itself from the consequences of its power. The parenthood that keeps falling short of the love it contains. The democracy that runs on appearances. The environment traded quietly for the arrangements that depend on its destruction. The predictions, the coma theory, the floating timeline, the 3 generations of damage that Burns inflicted on the Simpson family through a grudge that started in 1969, each of these was a section. Each section was a version of the same underlying observation. The Simpsons was always telling you something true. It was always doing it through jokes. And the jokes were always constructed with enough precision that the truth inside them was specific and accurate and recognizable to anyone paying attention. The show did not do this by accident. The writing staff that produced the Golden Seasons was composed of some of the best educated comedy writers in the history of American television, people with graduate degrees in the sciences and humanities, people who had studied the systems they were satirizing, people who understood that the difference between a good satirical joke and a mediocre one is the difference between a specific observation and a general one. General observations are not funny. Specific observations are funny. Specific, accurate observations about recognizable conditions are the mechanism of great comedy. The show earned its longevity through this specificity. It earned the trust of its audience through 36 years of making observations accurate enough that the audience felt seen by them. Not flattered, seen. There is a difference. Flattery tells you you are admirable. Being seen tells you you are real. The show chose to see its audience clearly rather than flatter them, and that choice, sustained across 3.5 decades, is why the relationship between the show and its audience is what it is. There is something worth saying about the experience of watching this show at night, alone, in the quiet hours when the day is over and the household is still. The show was designed for this. Not in any explicit way, the writers were not sitting in a room thinking about late-night solo viewers, but the emotional register the show operates in is the register of the quiet hours. The warmth, the familiarity, the specific comfort of spending time with people you know well even though they are not real, the reassurance of a world that resets, the family that keeps coming home. There is a reason that sleep content built around The Simpsons exists, and it is not only because the show is familiar, it is because the show is warm in a specific way. It is warm in the way of something that has accepted the people it is depicting, accepted their flaws and their limitations, and the systems working against them, and chosen to find them funny and human and worth spending time with rather than contemptible or tragic. That acceptance is the thing underneath all the satire. Underneath all the accurate observations about what is wrong with the systems Homer and Marge and Bart and Lisa are living inside. The observation that something is wrong does not preclude the warmth toward the people living inside the wrong thing. The Simpsons holds both simultaneously sees the trap and loves the person in it, identifies the system, and cares about the human beings the system is acting on, and that combination is the specific quality of the show that nothing else has quite replicated. In 36 years of people trying, documentary can see the trap. Drama can love the person in it. Only comedy can do both at the same time, in the same gesture, in the same moment that makes you laugh and makes you recognize and makes you feel the warmth and the sadness and the truth all at once. Without those things canceling each other out, The Simpsons is the television version of this capacity at its fullest expression. A family in a trap. A community organized around not seeing the trap. A show that saw both clearly, for 36 years and counting, and chose to laugh. Not because the trap is funny, because the laugh is how you stay present in the trap without being destroyed by it. Because the laugh is how you make it through to Friday evening, and the beer, and the couch, and the family intact, and another week behind you. Because the laugh is, at the end of 36 years of truths wrapped inside jokes, the oldest and most honest response that a person can have to the actual conditions of their actual life. Homer laughs. He does not always know why. He does not always understand what he is responding to. But he laughs, and the laugh is real, and the family is on the couch, and the loop continues. That is the whole show. That is the whole 36 years. Settle in. Let the light be low. Homer is on his way home. He always finds his way home. And in Springfield, which is everywhere and nowhere and the place we built to see ourselves clearly, the couch is there, the family is on it, and the screen will be warm for as long as you need it. Appendix. Small true things the show said along the way. There is no clean way to end a 36-year catalog. The show keeps going. The archive keeps growing. New episodes keep depositing new, small observations into the running total of what the show has noticed and chosen to say. Some of those observations deserve a final mention here. Not because they are the most important things the show ever said, but because they are the kind of thing that sticks with you in the way that small, specific truths stick, not as grand arguments, but as something overheard, accurate, and impossible to unhear. The show noticed that fame is not primarily about being seen, but about being recognized, and that these are different things, and that the hunger for recognition in Springfield, the way the town mobilizes around any celebrity, the way people orient themselves toward famous people as sources of significance, is the hunger of people for whom the channels of actual significance are mostly closed. Fame is the shortcut. The celebrity is the avatar. Springfield reaches for what it can get. The show noticed that the specific humor of working people with each other, the humor of Homer and Lenny and Carl at the plant, of Homer and Barney at Moe's, is the humor of people who have nothing to prove to each other because they are in the same situation. The performance of success and intelligence and taste that shapes social humor at higher economic levels is absent. What is left is the actual funny thing, whatever it is, said directly, received directly, the unmediated laugh between people who are not competing. The show noticed that the relationship between intelligence and happiness is not the one that the culture usually assumes. Lisa is more intelligent than Homer. Lisa is substantially less happy in her daily life. Homer's cognitive limitations prevent him from seeing the full dimensions of his trap and also prevent him from experiencing the specific, sustained misery that comes from seeing it clearly. The fog that dims Homer's perception of his circumstances also dims his perception of what those circumstances cost him. This is not an argument for ignorance. It is an observation that the relationship between understanding and well-being is more complicated than the culture's usual story about it. The show noticed that children understand more than adults believe they do. Maggie in particular, but also Bart and Lisa in different ways. These children inhabit a world that adults consistently underestimate them for comprehending, and their comprehension shapes their behavior in ways the adults around them cannot read because the adults are not looking for it. The children are paying attention, the adults assume they are not. The assumption allows the children to operate in a space that the adults' inattention provides. Maggie operates in that space almost entirely. Bart operates in the social version of it. Lisa operates in the intellectual version of it. All three of them are more aware of their circumstances than their parents realize, and the show has always known this, and occasionally, in a brief frame, let you see it too. The show noticed that forgiveness and healing are different things, and that Ned Flanders has mastered the first and been prevented from accessing the second, and that the mastery of forgiveness in the absence of healing is not the same as being at peace. It is the performance of peace, and the show is very specific about what performance costs over time. The show noticed that the moments where Homer is most fully himself, most alive, most present, most recognizably the person that the nuclear plant cannot reach, are almost always moments involving food or music or the people he loves. The specific pleasure Homer takes in eating is not gluttony in the moralized sense. It is the pleasure of someone for whom one of life's most reliable sources of genuine sensory experience has become the site of significant emotional investment. Homer eats with the fullness of someone who has learned that this specific pleasure is available to him reliably, that it is not contingent on anything he cannot control, that the donut will be as good as the donut has always been. That reliability is worth something. The show always knew it was worth something. The show noticed that the most honest conversations happen between people who have been awake long enough, or tired enough, or slightly outside their usual social context that the management of impression has relaxed. The conversations between Homer and Marge at the end of long days, the conversations between Bart and Homer in moments of genuine mutual exhaustion, the conversations between Lisa and Marge when both of them are past the point of performing for each other and have simply run out of the energy that performance requires. These conversations are not dramatic. They are not the conversations that episodes are built around. They are the corners of episodes about other things, 3 lines long, where the actual content of the relationships briefly surfaces before the plot requires the characters to go somewhere else. The show noticed that humor, at its best, is the most democratic language available, the form of expression that does not require education or class credentials or institutional access to deploy or receive. Homer cannot parse a Lisa argument. He can understand a Homer joke, and the Homer jokes are not lesser. They are just differently constructed, organized around different registers of human recognition, drawing on the same underlying capacity to see the gap between expectation and reality and find something true in the collapse. These are the small things. They are also the things that make the 36 years what they are. Not the grand arguments, not the sweeping critiques of the systems that shape Springfield's life. The small, specific noticing. The 1,000 moments of accurate observation that the show deposited over the decades, each one a tiny deposit in the running account of what Springfield and through Springfield, America actually looks like when someone is paying attention. The account is still open. The deposits continue. The show keeps noticing things and putting them in jokes and trusting the jokes to carry them to wherever they need to go. The loop continues. The truth keeps arriving. The laugh comes first. It always comes first. A final thought on what it means to keep watching. If you have made it this far, you have been in Springfield for a while now. Long enough to have moved through everything the show was always saying underneath what it appeared to be saying. Long enough to have followed the threads from the donut jokes to the working class trap, from the school's broken textbooks to what mass education actually does, from the Homer and Marge arguments to what the long marriage actually looks like, from Blinky the three-eyed fish to what a community's economic dependency does to its ability to protect itself. Long enough to have heard the truth writing inside 36 years of jokes. What do you do with it? Where does it go? After a long night in Springfield? Probably nowhere dramatic. That is the show's most honest answer, and it is consistent with everything the show has depicted about the relationship between understanding and action. Lisa understands the contamination. The contamination continues. Homer understands on some level the dimensions of his trap. He goes back to the plant tomorrow. The show has never promised that understanding leads to liberation or that recognition leads to change. It has just shown you clearly as a comedy can show anything, what the conditions are. What it does show what it has been showing for 36 years, alongside all the structural critique and the specific observation and the accumulated weight of the truth inside the jokes, is that people live full lives inside these conditions. That love is real inside the trap. That genuine pleasure is available inside the constraint. That humor is possible inside the contamination. That a family can be intact and warm and worth returning to even when the systems around it are doing what the systems do. This is not a comfortable argument. It is not the revolutionary argument that says, knowing what you know, change the conditions. It is also not the quietest argument that says, the conditions are fine, stop complaining. It is the specific, honest, 36 years patient argument that says, the conditions are real, the love inside them is also real, and the task is not to choose between seeing clearly and living warmly, but to find the way to do both at the same time. Homer does this imperfectly and continuously. The show watches him do it every week. And the reason the show is still running, the reason the loop is still turning, the reason the audience has not let it end, is that most people watching it are doing the same thing. Imperfectly, continuously. Finding the way to see clearly and live warmly in the same life, on the same couch, in the same house, in the same impossible town that cannot be found on any map because it is everywhere. Springfield is everywhere because the conditions it depicts are everywhere. The warmth inside those conditions is also everywhere. The Simpsons has been showing you both for 36 years. That is what you take with you, not a conclusion, not an action item. A way of seeing specific, warm, honest, willing to laugh. The way the show has always seen. The way it keeps offering. Season by season, episode by episode, joke by joke. The loop continues. The truth is still inside the jokes. The family is still on the couch. And Homer is always on his way home.